that's okay with you, Abby. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the October 8th, 2021 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're into Libra season, best month of the year. So welcome, everyone. We have shifted our kind of weekly meetings to start a little bit earlier. We're meeting from 9 to 12 for the foreseeable future, given the amount of work we have to kind of get between now and our goal of the council putting out a plan on December 1st. So thanks for everyone joining us. Quick recap of our agenda. We're going to approve minutes and a draft agenda first. Then we're going to spend a big chunk of time going over our pathways and strategies actions matrix, hopefully getting that in a final state so that we can begin the prioritization and equity screening process on those actions. We'll pause for some public comment and a little break, and then we'll run through the intended prioritization process with Jane and Marion, have another opportunity for public comment, and then spend a little bit of time looking out at the next 3 meetings so that we have a sense of our kind of workflow and assignments into the future. So that is it. With that, does the subcommittee have any comments or questions about the draft agenda or the minutes that were circulated from last week? Okay, seeing none, let's consider those both approved. Thank you. Okay, so, I don't know, Abby, if you have anything you want to add. I can give a little overview of kind of our next agenda item, or okay. So Abby's doing some sweet sign language. So I think as we just
I'm just trying to finish my homework. Don't tell.
Don't worry. So as we discussed at our last meeting, we do need to move into the kind of prioritization and refinement and equity screening of our actions. We have many actions under multitude of strategies and pathways. So the task leads and Charlie spent a good deal of time in the past week trying to wrangle our matrix down to something that is a little bit more concise, consolidated, actionable. And I think we made good progress on that. So we're going to share that with you all today. I think there's still certainly room and opportunity to continue to refine, revise our list of actions, but I think we needed to take a big bite out of that work, and we did accomplish that. So I'll hand it over to Pat in a second, but I think the plan is just to kind of go through each pathway to try to discuss broadly what changes we made and see if subcommittee members have any questions or concerns, and then ideally move that into a kind of a final form to move forward. We circulated that spreadsheet around midday yesterday to folks, and it is up on our website for today's meeting on the climatechange.com state website. So with that, I might pass, and Marion just put it into the chat. So thanks, Marion. So with that, I think Pat, maybe we'll pass on to you.
Sure. So I think what we thought we would do is there was kind of a lead or co-leads on kind of get this, the matrix in order, so to speak. So what we thought we would do is turn it to them to kind of highlight briefly what they did and to highlight any key questions or issues you want the working group to talk about. There's some things that are getting moved around. For instance, some things are being suggested to get moved actually over to rural resilience, for instance, and there's other changes that took place. So we want to kind of take about 15 minutes per topic just to get through them all by public comment. So we'll have to move pretty quickly. One thing to remember, we want to get a lot closer, but it doesn't have to be perfect because you are going to prioritize these various strategies and actions. So once we have we have it kind of cleaned up in order, actions that some people like or some people don't like, we can really go through that prioritization process to do some final deliberation. So the key is to get this in enough shape we can do that again, but we still have plenty of time we have a lot of rush time, tight time, but important time to continue to talk about, the importance, the priority, and things that people may not have fully. Okay, so the other thing to be thinking about, then we'll go, is that our thought, and we'll talk about this more after break, after public comment, is that we would like kind of 3 to 4 people to take each of these sections and do some of the ranking that Jane will talk about, the process the Climate Council is asking us to do. And that would be someone who can strongly represent an equity voice, someone who can represent ag, someone who can represent forestry. And there may be some of these pathways where actually need someone who can represent quote unquote kind of water or natural systems. So just be thinking about which one or more of these you all would want to kind of help begin to kind of rank these priority, these strategies and actions based on the rubric we'll go through after about halfway through today. Okay, so first let's start with mitigation. And who was I don't know, Ryan, were you the lead on that? You want to kind of describe kind of the key things you did and key questions for the working group to wrestle with?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, sound good.
Great. If it's all right with folks, I was going to share my screen.
Okay.
If I have those permissions, I believe I do, so that we can pull up what's before you today as a suggestion. So looking at the spreadsheet that's posted online and was shared with stakeholders and members yesterday, and through discussions with the planning group yesterday, and after discussions we've been having for several months. And then further looking at some of the details between tab A and tab C, folks will remember tab A was focused on sequestration and tab C was focused on emissions. And in reading the Global Warming Solutions Act and looking at how the law frames the work that needs to happen, right? The term, and this is close to the IPCC definition, right? Mitigation means the reduction of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and the preservation and enhancement of natural systems to sequester and store carbon in order to stabilize and reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so through this lens of mitigation, looking at what used to be titled the sequestration tab, and the proposal here is to house these recommendations that include not just agriculture, but the other natural and working lands, where many of the strategies and actions that are presented here in this spreadsheet have concomitant impact on both the rate of sequestration and the rate of emissions of nitrous oxide and methane. And for that reason, the distinction between those that are looking at emission reduction, which as the proposal before the group is to look at this as energy, alternative energy development and material substitution, is by and large what mostly existed in tab C. Any of the emission stuff that was related to agriculture focused on the solar questions that we've been wrestling with as a group, and most of the actual practices that have emission reduction coefficients were housed in the sequestration tab. So that's I know we only have 15 minutes, but this is a proposal that is available here and is focused in a change to the pathway in tab A from sequestration to mitigation, and focuses on instead of maintaining and expanding carbon sequestration and storage of Vermont's natural and working lands, maintain and expand Vermont's natural and working lands' role in the mitigation of climate change through human interventions to reduce the sources and enhance the sinks of greenhouse gases. And the human intervention component speaks to the portion of the IPCC definition of mitigation, which puts the human actions that are part of these anthropogenic emissions and sequestration steps that can be taken. And so that's why that's included in that proposed language. Looking through the remaining strategies and then the actions, again, Charlie tackled the forestry and tree cover sections mostly. Judson first, and then myself took a look at some of the agricultural languages that are here. And so I'm just going to start on this first strategy and action, for which I wanted to bring in a bit about what we, so this is leverage. It used to be leverage, expand, and adapt existing state of Vermont programs that support agricultural greenhouse gas emissions reductions, agricultural soil carbon sequestration and storage, while tracking and quantifying resilience and adaptation co-benefits. And it was focusing on programs. And I think these are absolutely the strategy that we want to try to elevate through this process. But one thing I wanted to try to center here, at least for discussion with this Ag Ecosystem Subcommittee, and certainly 1, 2, and 3 here are very wordy as far as describing the processes by which agriculture, forestry, and other land, natural and working lands can impact mitigation efforts. But I wanted to write that out for the first presentation here, and then just elevate to the group, where this ag, forestry, and other land use definition in the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report came from, talking about kind of the land uses and the strategies that exist for mitigation within those different sectors. Each sector can have certainly a different, set of pathways that most commonly run into mitigation, but that's where these 1, 2, and 3 strategies come into play. And since we're talking about the strategies that we're going to use, and that many of these actions can be housed under either the prevention of emissions, the actual reduction of emissions, and then also the concomitant increase in sequestration in soils as an example, is why listing all 3 of them and not breaking them out into 3 separate subcategories of strategies, and they're kind of all housed together. So to come back to,
might be good to stop for a second, see if people have any questions. Again, I'm going to go through a few more details here, but if people are okay with this kind of change, again, it's really it's not ridding of anything. It's moving some things around and slightly reframing to be more clear and in keeping with the legislation and broader kind of definition. So questions or comments about this kind of change to kind of, in some ways, the framing, really. Any questions or concerns? Let's see, Alyssa says thumbs up. Just kind of looking. Jake.
Yeah, overall, I think it's great. And I'm just wondering, the one thing that maybe seems to be removed from this change is the tracking and quantifying resilience and adaptation co-benefits. So that would be my only kind of question of, has that been moved elsewhere, or just how to consider that, treating that part of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't ever want to suggest we're going to stop tracking that connection and those co-benefits. It's not present in this wording. I think it's represented in many of the other pathways as to how these actions would be, valued for those other benefits. And I certainly think that we could work on some language to try to elevate that within this strategy if that's a gap, because I think you're right, it's not explicitly called out right now as the language stands.
Yeah.
Ryan, I don't know if you could just say like leverage, expand, adapt, and track existing, or something, like if you just add the word track in the laundry list of verbs there. I don't know if that helps Jake or not. I guess it doesn't really help the co-benefits piece as explicitly as maybe you're hoping for.
Yeah, because I think that's definitely the key point there, is that, and the additive component is that it's the tracking of those co-benefits.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, not tied to these, of course, being in the strategy language, and so I think we'd have words if we cut these out to put this back at the end of the first part of the sentence.
Yeah.
So I can't highlight it within the block, but I've made it in red to point out that has been dropped and should be checked.
Good.
As well.
Ryan, just because of time, let's move down. I noticed there were several strikeouts in lines 17 through 22. Do you want to just kind of explain what happened to those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So in trying to get to a concise, actionable list, these are not struck because no one, because they're disagreed with or should not be elevated. Rather, we feel, or I feel, the preceding actions include those actions within them, right? Whether it's forested buffers, NRCS coordinating with them on their cost share programs, FAP program is included within, agronomic practices for reduced tillage and cover cropping. The pollinator habitat should have its own. Oh, so this is FAP amendment. No-till cover crops already in there. And then, livestock access to rivers and streams is already included within the regulatory framework of the RAPs. And so for those reasons, they're, I feel, or perhaps we feel, already represented within these, and gets us to a more concise list for prioritization and ranking.
Okay, great. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Marley has made the point that a few of the lines need action verbs because they're not actions yet. So that just probably a wording thing. But good point. Jake.
Yeah, I'm just with with those that have the strike throughs and have been struck through because they're included, or they're believed to be included in some of the others or other actions. Can we make just a comment as to which one of those is assumed to be included, so that it's just clear that it's just a little hard to kind of follow that? Yeah.
I think a little more.
All right. So included in.
Yeah.
So the transfer from the Word document to this didn't allow those comments to go with it, and so yes, can go through and add those in on which preceding line we feel they're reflected there. That's a great point.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, totally understanding the difficulty of transitioning all this.
Okay. There's one, Ryan, there's a comment from Zach, but I think is something we should probably discuss briefly, which is on line 13, which is, quantify versus change or update wraps. So we should probably talk about 13. Yeah,
sure. The required agricultural practices for the Agricultural Unemployment Source Pollution Control Program, at this time, trying to understand the targets for agriculture, the levers that can be pulled on, and the co-benefits that we have from our water quality programming before amending the RAPs to include standards or requirements past what's already on the books. An inventory of those requirements within the RAPs that result in the change in land management that have a mitigation co-benefit need to be quantified to understand where the state falls in its regulatory framework for climate action goals. None of the co-benefits from water quality practices have been quantified in the emissions inventory, and that is a gap that needs to be addressed and studied before regulatory action is proposed to be amended. So this I see as a first step to understanding where we stand. It doesn't preclude amendments, but we need to understand what the current regulatory programs are delivering before proposing amendments, because they may be sufficient at this time, but they may not be, and they may need amendment. Or it could be achieved through further voluntary programming, which is already delivering, about 60% of or more of the water quality benefit in the state compared to the regulatory programming, as it's more cost effective and much broader to act, a lot of good participation in those programs.
There's a suggestion from a few folks in the chat from the members or staff about, could you say quantify, get it straight, could you say quantify required agricultural practices to climate change mitigation benefits and update as needed, and leave that as a as needed piece, as if and when you decide that it's not sufficient. Obviously quantifies the first step. Jake.
Yeah, on that point, to have it read clearly, I'm just thinking it's quantify the climate change mitigation benefits of required agricultural practices to update or amend the RIPs to have, I'm just trying to find the right language now. But yeah, the quantification is of the mitigation benefits of those practices in order to make decisions around what kind of amendments need to be made for climate required sort of climate mitigation practices.
Yeah, I agree with Jake. That's much easier to follow, and I think is the intent behind, Ryan, what you've outlaid here.
So
Yeah,
Jason,
if folks have a language suggestion for that. I'm having a tough time wrapping my head around that. I don't disagree with what was just shared, but the rewriting of it, please share what you think would work.
I think it's, well, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but quantify the climate change mitigation benefits of the required agricultural practices and update as needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Good. All right. How's that look?
Yeah, folks can see my screen. Absolutely.
Great. Ryan, only because of time, I'm just kind of plowing us through. So any other key in the next 4 minutes, any other key things we should look at from changes again?
Yeah, related to this is the other, on the tracking system, we already have a tracking system for water quality. Let's see what the climate benefits of that are. That's been added. Some of the related energy materials section have been brought over around food waste and some of the tracking and chemical usage. And then I want to throw it over to Charlie as he worked on some of the other sections of the strategy and action. And want to make space for him to speak to that.
Thanks, Ryan. And sorry again, everyone, for not being able to access this thing yesterday morning. I don't know how you guys managed to get into state systems in places in Vermont without cell service. That seems like a pretty big gap. But anyway, the main change around the forest section on this pathway was just around what Ryan's got highlighted here. And that's just taking what's in line 38 and basically removing the track carbon sequestration angle here, just because I think this strategy is really around incentivizing forest management practices, but not at the level that we'd be looking at with carbon markets, which would have the level of rigor and capacity to actually track the sequestration metrics. This one is really more around kind of management principles. That's why it's tagged as something like the American Tree Farm System. So it kind of removes the sequestration tracking element, which is captured elsewhere, and then just kind of looks at, again, how do we utilize a certification system like this for procurement standards if we're looking at things that have public oversight. You know, the parallel here would be when any kind of harvesting occurs that is going towards some sort of thermal or energy generation, there's requirements for a biologist to look at things like deer yards. So this could be a parallel that, you know, anything harvested for uses under Public Service Board oversight goes through this kind of certification. And then the last one here is just adding that if we have a certification system like this, we could explore market opportunities to help support it. I think the rest of the forest ones in here are a little bit maybe reorganized, but nothing else has really changed.
And I noticed, I think in terms of kind of other GHG emissions, like I think pesticides and stuff, I think that's added into line 35. So that was a suggestion. So that got folded in here. Okay. And food waste issues too. Okay. All right. Any other questions on this? I think Ryan, given the kind of what people asked, just kind of some modest, adjustments would be good, including explain just the changes that were strikeouts. Any other final questions or comments on this section? Okay. Great. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, folks who worked on that. Again, be thinking about who might want to help within beginning to prioritize these things as we go forward. All right, so Lauren had the unenviable task of dealing with adaptation with, like, I don't know, 170 actions. So Lauren is going to help walk through the really good work she did to try to kind of just distill this a little bit better and clarify it. So Lauren, over to you.
It was 133. I think I got it down to 70 something, mostly through merging a lot of them. Let me share my screen. Are you all seeing it? And if so, is it big enough font?
Make it, maybe, can you make it slightly, maybe 125? Sound.
Is that better?
Yeah, maybe even one more if you can do it. We can still see the whole screen. So we'll go to, there we go. That's probably a little better. Thank you.
Good.
Yep, that's great. That's actually even better.
Okay. To Jake's point, during Ryan's pathway, I was fortunate enough to have the selected formatting. So we all kind of did this separately, and I kind of had to merge to mine. Sorry, everybody else. But I think, Jake, I did capture any type of movement or anything within the comments. But like Ryan's, Black language is language that we've already had. Strike through language, or strike through indicates removing existing language, and red is new. There are, I think, 10 or 11 strategies under adaptation. I think there's an opportunity still to merge them if we have interest in having fewer strategies, but keeping the same number of actions underneath them. But happy to walk through these. No significant changes. We had a conversation as the task leads about this little bucket here, the technical assistance, which seemed to be pretty pervasive across the pathways, and whether or not we wanted to capture that under one pathway, have all of our technical assistance, or have the technical assistance that was more relevant to each of the individual pathways captured as such. I think we landed on B, but I think we could do A, the former, if we want to. So just left that there for consideration by the full subcommittee. And I see there is a chat, but I'm not able to do all of that. So Pat, let me know.
Oh, yeah. No, we can start with Ali. You have your hand up. Let me go to you first. Ali, go ahead.
Hello. Sorry, lots of buttons to push. So I just wanted to make a comment on lines 13 and 14. I think we want to be cautious about putting such a focus on future climate adapted species. That's really based on sort of like current locations of species are growing and projections of future climates. So it really only considers mean annual temperature, total precipitation, not extreme events, not pests and pathogens, not resilience to disturbance. So I think we should certainly, like, I promote education of those species and awareness, and we want to consider those when we do management or planting. But I really, I see on 14, it says require. I would certainly recommend changing that phrasing. And on 13, it says a focus on planting future climate adapted tree species. I think the focus should be on promoting resilience, and there's a lot of different strategies for that: increasing species diversity, increasing complexity in our forests, increasing downwood, increasing the percentage of large old trees. It goes on and on. So I wouldn't pull out one of those strategies in particular. And I think focusing on, more work needs to go into the future climate adapted species, topic in general.
Good. Charlie, you had a comment on this, maybe, and then we'll pick the wording.
Yeah, right in line with Ali's comments there. And apologies, this was another piece of language that I didn't have the chance to insert yesterday, but I think that 13, 14, and 15, I think we can roll those together into just one action that gets at more something along the lines of just promoting and utilizing resources like Vermont's 2015 publication, Maintaining and Creating Resilient Forests in Vermont. NIAC has some other material there. So I think just 13, 14, 15, we roll them into one, and we just focus on promoting and utilizing existing strategies around exactly what Ali was saying. And we just pull out the climate adapted species from this one, since it's kind of a different can of worms. And I can get whoever needs that language, that language.
Yeah,
Charlie,
I'm gonna put another big all caps Charlie on that one, because that was a lot.
Great. Okay, so I think we do that. Let's see. There's a comment that there's usually no hyphen in climate adaptation forestry, just a spelling thing. And then Marley suggested in line 7, maybe the RPCs, it needs to be broad, increased funding to regional planning commissions and others to hire and support natural resource staff. Marley, just want to describe what language change you would suggest.
I don't necessarily have a preference. I'm just concerned that if we only put one organization in, that's what people are going to zone in on. I think just increase technical assistance funding to organizations that, I don't know, I'll work on it. Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we put Marley some language there? Lauren, maybe we just know Marley will give you some language there. Okay.
I do want to say.
Do others agree?
Yeah,
I don't want to make it so vague that doesn't leave much for by way of breadcrumbs to like, what are we funding here? We just want to support natural resource staff.
No, I absolutely agree, Lauren, and I strongly support that point. So yeah, I know that in the past when the legislature sees something, that's the end of it. So.
Okay, so why don't I think like as Lauren said, you want to be specific, but maybe it's maybe just add increased funding to regional planning commissions and whatever else you're thinking. Could Abby suggested RPCs, NRCS, conservation districts? I mean, there's any number of potentialities there, right?
Right.
And certainly maybe within state control is certainly conservation districts as well as RPCs. Jake.
Yeah, kind of, I think to the line of questioning that Marley has is, I'm curious if we can somehow be more specific or direct about sort of the leverage of that, of providing natural resource staff to regional planning commissions. Like what's the priority of that, you know, specifically, versus there's some other very specific recommendations around increasing, you know, TA and capacity for some of the organizations that have been mentioned. So I think it's maybe vague in the sense of just the intent, like why that is an intentional strategy.
And some questions, Jake, to your point, does 8 kind of cover 7? I don't know. Because some of the technical assistance actually comes from, we maybe don't have them listed here, but comes from, you know, AAFM or DEC, and maybe we can fold 7 and 8 together somehow. I don't know.
To Jake's, I think the intent, and this was in the comment field pulled from land use originally. So general thought being that regional planning commissions play a huge role in both regional but also local planning. And don't necessarily have natural resource focused or trained staff to make sure that climate adaptation, climate resilience, climate mitigation is really at the forefront of how they help towns plan and create regional plans themselves. So I think just understanding the capacity, since they're kind of like our de facto county governments, that we're placing the appropriate funding so that they can have appropriate staff to help make sure that our regional and town plans are stronger in that realm.
Yeah, and
I can elaborate that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some kind of articulation of the, you know, yeah, integrating those considerations into town municipal planning by adding that staffing capacity and expertise.
Thanks, Jake. Charlie, then Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, Lauren just said what I was going to say, that I think this one was a specific, I mean, I think Marley's got a great point, but I think this action was really specific around RCPs. And so I don't think we should lose the specificity around what's needed for them.
Right.
I guess my only concern is that RPCs don't have the staff, but others already do. So do we want to reinvent the wheel in the RPCs or incentivize collaboration?
Yeah, I think if we add collaboration would be good. I just don't want to lose the focus on the RPCs. And so maybe if we talk about to hire or support, we can tweak the language around kind of drawing in existing support from elsewhere. But I think that the emphasis on RPCs, I think we want to maintain.
Abby, I'm going to let you go in before Ryan, just because I think you were going to jump in on this point. Abby, go ahead.
I'm really not, I mean, I understand that theoretically. I also just know that there are a lot of organizations that already work really closely with this work with the RPCs, i.e. your conservation districts. And so they're already underfunded, but doing this work. And so it doesn't make sense to me to try, unless the RPCs can have specific designation that I don't know. I think I disagree. I think we need to be pushing the collaborative aspect of this, because I think so much of what goes awry in some of these situations is we have a million different people doing the same thing in different places and they're never talking to one another. And I don't want to replicate that any further. So that's, I guess, where I'm coming from on that is I'm all for supporting the RPCs. I think they're playing an incredibly important role. I just know that they're already, at least in Windham County, doing a lot with the conservation districts. And I think we just want to build out that collaborative capacity.
As much as I hate to say it, it's so much harder to require collaboration than it is to say, we're going to give you funding to hire the people to do this, since you already have the structure and you're already the ones responsible for creating these plans. But I would love to see incentivized collaboration. I just don't know how that can be forced to achieve the desired outcome.
I'll follow up with Chris Campany to see if he has any genius ideas because of how they function down here.
Yeah, I can talk to him too. I'll add that.
All right, why don't we let's try. I think again, we're going to have to flesh this one out more. We also can, so let's try to like talk to these folks, see if we can frame out this more broadly. Ryan, you had a comment on this before we move on.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore my agreement with both Marley and Abby on the point of where folks are already researched and have the resource and have the subject matter expertise in these areas. The opportunity for collaboration is important. NRCDs play an important role in this space and would more support the collaborative aspect than exclusive funding for RPCs. Appreciate the roles they play, but both are charged in statute to deal with planning and support to landowners, and think NRCDs have an important role to play in that space as well. Thanks.
So, you bet. So I think that this one's going to take a little bit more work. I think people have got some thoughts. Again, you may end up having two, one about fund and one about collaboration, and then you can rank them and prioritize them, and we can come back to this. There are some interesting suggestions on the chat, which we'll save just so you have it as you think about writing this. Lauren, because we have about 3 minutes left for this section, other key things you want to highlight?
Yeah, I'll highlight that there is an entire strategy with 4 or 5 actions in it that I recommend that we send to rural resilience. They largely became a strategy related to stormwater management for the built environment. And since that's not really under our purview, I think we did great work in creating a bunch of actions that would yield mitigation and adaptation efforts via stormwater management. But I think we should just package that and send it off to rural resilience for consideration.
Any questions about that in specific? And I think there's a few places where we've identified stuff that's probably more rural resilience because it's very much on the built environment, and we're trying to focus on the natural infrastructure that goes with it. So any questions about that change? Otherwise, we'll gather these up and forward them. Any concerns about that? Okay, one, I just want to note in the chat, Cheryl Joy had some good additional ideas about that planning one around the RPC. So just kind of want to note that in chat. I don't have time to go into it, but some interesting suggestions. There is a question about line 25, whether that actually includes tracking sort of forced carbon loss. And I don't know, Charlie or Lauren, on 25, if we just need to add a word or it's good as is.
Are we talking about limiting fire or increasing fire for management?
And my read of this, and based on incorporating a couple of the comments that I see Charlie just came off mute, was that this is largely like a data gathering to inform other efforts, but happy to amend if needed.
There is an action later on in the land use tab that recommends fire as a management strategy for forests.
So this
that supports fire use.
So this is just a tracking question.
Thank you.
Okay. Charlie.
I actually had a comment. I got distracted for a second. And before we move off of this tab, I just wanted to point out something lower down. So if we're leaving the tab, I'll point it out. But Lauren, if you're going to keep scrolling, I'll wait.
Well, I think I only have like a minute left. So if you have a specific line you want to jump to.
Exactly.
Yeah, my only comment around line 44, incorporating headwater storage into UVA. comments kind of twofold. One is, I think we need to determine kind of like how and what that would be, but also I think one recommendation we're leaning towards is maybe under land use, we have a bunch of UVA stuff, and maybe we want to pull that out, put it in land use, and then carve out a separate strategy under the land use pathway that addresses all the current use stuff we're talking about.
So maybe what if we just say this one needs to be considered under land use? I don't know, how does that sound to folks, to Charlie's point? That's where most of the other UVA stuff is, so. And then Lauren, just in the chat, Marley had actually a specific wording for that RPC line, which if you want to copy and to throw into the spreadsheet, have at it. If not, that's okay too. And we'll give you a minute to do that. So. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, Lauren, any other, in our last 30 seconds, anything else?
I'll just say that there were a couple, and I'll bring this up when I go to the education pathway, but there were a lot of things that seem to be opportunities for just widespread general public education and or practices that people could take on their own private land that I pulled under and put around education opportunities. So things like reducing mowing, which I know is also under mitigation somewhere. I think there are opportunities to just create some educational materials. So if you see a lot of cross outs in this section, a lot of them are pulled there. I think that's it by what I need to share.
Great, thank you. And really quickly, just I'm being somewhat liberal with the chat, just it's helpful to get this done. So there is a question about whether we need to note kind of carbon loss in forest under line 25. So I don't know, Charlie, whether you can weigh in one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think line 25 is getting at just monitoring forest carbon stocks. So I think my preference would be to just keep it, for simplicity, broad, acknowledging that carbon stocks are dynamic for any number of reasons. And so rather than go in and talk about, you know, what's influencing the dynamic nature of them, we just acknowledge that, you know, there's multiple things that are influencing it, and we're going to try to track all of them, basically. I do think that, I think we're going to have a separate conversation about kind of what's a bigger threat to carbon stocks, whether it's conversion or timber harvesting, but that's a separate conversation we can have.
Okay, so maybe Zach, if you want to make a public comment when we get there, have at it. I just want to make sure we at least touched on it. So Charlie, thank you for that. Okay, only because of time, we're going to keep going. So next is energy and materials. Remembering this was a bit of a refocus. Ryan, over to you. Ryan, you had your hand up, I think.
Yes, I do, and I'm talking, but I'm muted. I apologize. I'll figure this out. There was one area that was flagged for discussion under B, adaptation, line 80. I think that there exists in line 16 on A, under agricultural specific strategies and actions for mitigation. There's a natural resource restoration practice line. And I think that insofar as I think the goal of this would be, you know, what is the wetland restoration potential area? That's an agricultural crop field. Whether it is the active restoration of it through the Wetland Reserve Easement Program or another hybrid program that folks would want to see, you know, natural land management happen. I think that would fit better under program development in that space than under here for adaptation. So I think it's a duplicate and think it's, you know, captured under that line 16 in A, and just wanted to offer that for
which line was
having
that? Which line was that for ag? It's got it 16. Okay.
Yeah, line 16A.
All right. Okay.
Just because I think that the way that is framed is going to create a lot of conflict, and don't want that wetland restoration or natural resource restoration goal to be, you know, waylaid, because I think it's already captured, and that specific action doesn't, you know, that there's just a lot of programs to fund that sort of work.
Okay, great. All right, so let's note that. Okay, good. All right, so again, I think, for the kind of the tab authors, hopefully enough advice to kind of refine and revise some of these things, given the discussion that we had. Okay, energy and materials. Ryan, I don't know if this was you or someone else. I can't remember who did tab C.
So I was in charge of it, but I think since it was highly implicated by the changes that Ryan and others suggested to the mitigation tab, most of the changes resulted from their work. I'm happy to kind of share it with folks, but I don't think there's too much to discuss. But let me just put it up real quick. And I'd invite Ryan and others to kind of share their thoughts on it once I find it. Is that up?
Yes, sir. Maybe make it just a little bit bigger, but it's up. Yeah.
Hold on here. I'm on two screens, so trying to figure out what's going on. How does that look?
Now we're looking at your email.
Oh, okay. Don't want that.
We all have enough of our own email. We don't want yours.
Yeah. All right. How about that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so there were some changes made to the title of the pathway, I think based on the approach Ryan had articulated under the mitigation tab. And then some small tweaks throughout the substantive recommendations, some renaming of some strategies, and then some changes and some deletions and kind of moves and referrals summarized at the bottom of the page. So that's pretty much it for this one.
I think maybe Billy, the only question is moving those CSM ones, send them off to cross sector. So if anybody has any questions about 52 through whatever that is, 30, I guess, Excel spreadsheet line 35 to 38. If anybody have questions or comments about that, let's talk about that. We spent a lot of time kind of talking through these earlier, in part trying to get some of the language right, I think. Charlie.
I just wanted to just make a space for, at some point, a conversation about how we refer these things to other committees and then what we do to follow up with them. Just not for right now, but just to make sure we talk about like what that process is and how we ensure that like other committees don't get this stuff and go, oh guys, that's so cute, and then kind of like just shove it to the side.
Let's make sure, Charlie, if Jane and Marion, if you guys can remember when we come back to the next stage is after break, let's definitely cover that as part of what we do. Thank you. Really good point.
Good suggestion, Charlie. So that's it for this one. I think it largely stayed intact, and just some framing of the pathway was revised and some pieces pulled out and went to the mitigation tab.
So Judy raised the point, which I was wondering about too, is like, we haven't really quite finished the biomass conversation. And I don't know quite where it goes. I don't know if, do we have biomass in other pathways, or is this where most of biomass was in this one? That's what I can't remember.
This is the main one. This is the main one that talked about biomass.
Okay. So Judy, I think go ahead and dive in here if you have specific comments about things you don't think should be forwarded or further conversation we need to have.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble following this so quickly, knowing that I've worked with the legislation for quite a few years and that they're just simple Joe Blows. I'm not sure they're going to understand this language because it's taken me 6 months, 7 months to look up a lot of these things. And it just seems like it should be a little more simplified. But as far as biomass, I don't think we should be supporting the use of biomass for electricity at all. Not even as a transitional mechanism. It's just too damaging.
So is that the question, so like one thing, I mean, I guess is, I don't know whether people would accept this, but I guess one thing is to be more clear about what we're not advocating for, right? Some of this is about conversion, what you already have, make it more efficient. But Judy, what you're suggesting is no more biomass for electricity, and that's an explicit statement.
I mean, exactly. I mean, how can we recommend the largest polluter in this state as being something we want to use as a transitional thing to move forward to help climate change? It's like saying, oh, we're going to go back to coal again.
Charlie.
Yeah, I think Judy's point about being explicit with our language as far as kind of where we're talking about biomass and how we're using it and what we're recommending is a really important one, to be really clear about what we're intending. You know, I do think that we do need to kind of make some space for, we have existing facilities, and I mean, our recommendation could be just shut them all down today, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so I do think we need to have some recommendations in here around how do we make the things that we have that are bad less bad.
Well, and that's been my problem, Charlie. People have said to me, well, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't really want to just shut that down, or I don't think the governor's going to accept that. But to tell you the truth, I don't give a damn about who's going to accept it. We were directed to give recommendations. And if a recommendation is to shut down these polluters, we need to do it.
I mean, look, if we want to make specific recommendations about the McNeil plant and call that out specifically, I mean, we can, but I go back to, like, I think we're folding a bunch of different things into one bucket, and we're not, I mean, like, big picture, you know, even the IPCC has said that biomass has to be a part of our solution, right? Like, it's got to be in there. And that's the group that we keep going back to and looking at as being kind of our gold star here. So, you know, I think that, yeah, I guess my problem here is that I think we keep looking at, like, the bad things about specific facilities maybe, and we roll that into the overall conversation of what we're talking about moving forward with. And then, you know, as far as the practical nature of calling for the McNeil plant to be shuttered or something like that, I mean, if we want to have those individual conversations, we can, I guess. I don't know if, are we getting into that level of specificity with this plan? I mean, because there's a lot of specific things going on in the state that we can call out individually as it goes to facilities or individual, you know, practices and companies and things like that. And,
well, Charlie, we're not getting into specifics. We're saying incentivize and support. We can't do that with the state's largest polluter. How can we pay them and support them to keep polluting?
But so we're going back and forth here. You're talking about the state's largest polluter, and I assume you're talking specifically about the McNeil plant. But if we're talking about incentivizing conversion of combined heat and power models, I mean, again, we're crossing over here in terms of, are we talking about principles of use, or talking about specific generation facilities? And I guess I'm cool, we can do either, but we have to either separate it out into two different conversations or keep it at one level or the other, because we're talking past each other at this point, I think.
Yeah, so I think here's my thought. I think here's one thought is we add a line that's essentially something along what even maybe Zach put in chat, put it as a line item. We're going to prioritize stuff, and then you can kick it out later, right? This is, again, I'm trying to, we don't have time today. Today doesn't necessarily resolve everything. Charlie, you're right. We need to be clear between kind of existing and new, and we probably need to be more general than any specific facility, because this is not kind of the scale of this plan. But I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of have the debate, be able to prioritize or rank it, and then even talk about equity through that, but not necessarily solve it today, because I don't think we have time for that.
Oh, Patrick,
Yeah.
You have said 15 times since we started this meeting, we don't have time.
Judy, apologize for that. What I want to do is make sure that we do address this issue, which is very important to you, and we do it well. Whether we do it now or in the coming weeks as we do ranking, I don't know. And I do know that under the equity screen, one thing that Kaya had talked about was this might be a really good one to do an equity screen around, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
And I do want to note that I think that Zach had an interesting idea for, again, a potential idea. A lot of you may not support it, that we could just put in a line item then to consider. Abby, over to you.
That was going to be my suggestion, is based on what I'm hearing. This is clearly, we keep coming back to this issue, and I feel that so that everybody in this group feels heard on this matter and feels that they can live with the resolution that we come to, this has to be the priority issue that gets run through, that we work through with Kaya, and potentially yeah, it sounds like this is going to be one of those things where it is, our language around this is going to need to be explicitly clear. And I'm not sure that we can accomplish that without going through the equity screening. But I also guess what I'm thinking about is this is something I was going to talk about when I present my pathways as well. But what has continued to come up to me is that, this is going to be an overarching theme through all of this. John, I'm so sorry. Would you mind hitting mute on your microphone?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where.
John Brabant, please mute yourself.
Thank you. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. We're going to have to specify, and I'm wondering if it comes out in the overarching narrative that I plan to try to start writing within the next few days, the equitable implementation and the way that we're structuring these actions, the way that we're recommending any action that comes out of this committee. Do we want to have it explicit in the individual language, or do we want to have it made clear that the will of this group is that, polluters need to, I don't know what the language is, but there are ways I think that we could make it very clear that any of our actions or strategies need to be either run through the guiding principles of just transitions before they're implemented as policy or regulation, or something along those lines, so that we're not putting forward recommendations without making it clear that in order for them to become a policy or a regulation, it is the will of this group, not that we really have any power in that ultimately, but we can make the recommendation very clear that it is a priority for us that any new action moving forward be run through the guiding principles. I don't know if that helps.
So one possibility is, again, to add a line item, something along the lines that Zach said. I took a crack at it. So we add a line, and I think we're going to hold off on maybe referring these to the CSM, excuse me, until we kind of have some further discussion. But what do people think about it for now, adding a line about prevent any large scale or just new biomass electricity generation and phase out existing facilities? What if we add that as a line to consider?
If we're going to have a broader conversation about it, why don't we just stop it here and do that instead of adding new lines and then arguing over them?
So co-chairs, to that point, Charlie, again, we kind of circle back to this, but we have not been able to resolve it. So where is the place for this conversation? And Abby, maybe back to your idea. What do you think?
I think, as I've said, I think biomass has to be worked through with Kaya.
Okay. I
don't feel we currently have the tools and capability to do that here without perpetuating further strain.
Okay. So I think then
can I just flag why specific? I mean, I don't disagree that we should talk about it with Kaya, but I think now we're merging environmental impacts and impact of communities, and I don't know, it just seems like the conversation is starting to spin into a whole bunch of different directions, and I just want to make sure we're clear on what part of this we're looking to consider and discuss.
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. I think there's equity considerations that we should certainly work through with Kaya and the group, but I think some of the other opposition being raised is not specific to those considerations. They're more broad around pollution and things of that nature. But it sounds like Judy is in her comments suggesting this is squarely an equity issue. So maybe we should defer to what
I don't understand how something I get there's inequities in how it's applied and utilized, but like, I think when we make statements like biomass is not equitable, like it's an inanimate object. It can't be inequitable. It's how we apply it, how we use it, how we, I mean, like, I get
What
that,
about-
but
That's
about,
the
like-
problem. That's the problem, Charlie. In our guiding principles, we have fairness to all living and non-living things. There is no such thing as an inanimate object in this conversation.
no, but I mean, like, if we're,
Guys, I'm going to interrupt, and I apologize to do that. We are not, we need to discuss this. I realize there's a difference of opinion and also of understanding. So I think co-chairs, the job falls on kind of the co-chairs and the planning team to figure out the very explicit place over the next few weeks. We have this conversation, and to Judy's point, give it the time to have. We're not going to resolve it today. So what I'm going to suggest is line 35 and 36 in the Excel spreadsheet. I think reference at least 35 is to biomass. We're not going to refer that right now. The 37, 38 aren't biomass. We could refer those if we choose to. And I think we probably need to find a place for this to discuss explicitly in the coming weeks, but not right now. Jake, final point on this?
Yeah, I was sort of along those lines of, I feel like there's members of the subcommittee that are more sort of educated and have spent more time on this specific issue, and there's others, like I'll admit myself, that I sort of don't know where I fall, because I like, we haven't assessed together the sort of the various issues around this, and where the science stands, and where kind of these issues of equity fall. So yeah, I feel conflicted as to, are we close to any kind of consensus agreement around making a recommendation in one direction or the other around biomass and specifically biomass electricity generation. So I just don't feel, I don't feel comfortable right now as a group as to making any kind of informed recommendation. I say that knowing that there are people here that have, very strong feelings in one direction or the other, but I don't feel like that's sort of fully representative of us as an entity.
Thanks, Jake. Abby, and then I want to kind of close the discussion only for now on this topic.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that potentially, to Ally's point, I'm wondering if we need a very clearly defined set of definitions. Oh, sorry, Lauren wants to make.
Yeah, I missed Lauren. Sorry, Lauren, go in. I missed you. Go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, so that it's very explicit. This is part of the transparency piece of a just transition, right? Is that it needs to be very explicit for the general public what we're talking about. And so what does biomass mean specifically in every instance that we're referring to it? Because I'm with Jake, my lack of knowledge here means that I'm not able to ask the questions that I feel like I would need to be able to ask. And so I think whomever feels, whether it's Ally or Charlie or Billy, could lay out definitions. What does it mean? What are we talking about when we're talking about biomass? What are we talking about when we're talking about biomass electricity generation? Oh my God, et cetera, et cetera. Because that's personally what I'm struggling with. Is this is it sounds like an enormous issue that has large scale implications, both for public health, et cetera, but that we're all talking around each other potentially because we don't understand. We need more specific language as to how to talk about this.
Lev, I'm going to come back to do quickly after that, but Lauren, sorry I missed you. Go over to you.
No, it's fine. A broader recommendation is that I think the majority of our actions are not, the majority of them are not really controversial. There are clearly a few that all of us are not going to agree on, and that makes perfect sense. It would be strange if there weren't any of those. I would make a strong recommendation, since there are some that some of us will have more knowledge on than others and vice versa, that if you are somebody who wants to promote or has something removed, that you make a small informed case statement about it. I mean, I created that a defense of or an explanation of a river corridor based strategy that I knew would potentially be controversial, that it would hopefully inform those who aren't as aware and highlight a couple of the opportunity areas and what we're currently missing. And I think that would be really helpful. At full council this week, we saw just a total like unraveling around the Transportation and Climate Initiative for the same reason that it was just kind of presented as a recommended strategy and a lot of people didn't know what it was and a lot of people weren't happy with it. And at some point in time, there has to be a space to provide knowledge to those that don't have it. And I think that's kind of incumbent upon anybody that wants to see something in this plan. I don't know, for there to be better conversation and yet to provide the information that you have access to and share that knowledge with us.
So maybe, Lauren, to that point, if anybody wants to make a case for either clarity and or support of something or support of, of something else, either yes, we should do it and here's why, or no, we shouldn't, here's why. I think that would be helpful. And Abby, to your point, maybe we can figure out a few state staff just to help bring a little clarity to the conversation when we have it explicitly soon. So we kind of all are at least talking from the same terms. Let's make sure we're arguing about the substance and not about just confusion of understanding, right? So maybe we can figure out some help to do that. But to Lauren's point, I think it is incumbent on people, whatever direction you are, to try to probably say a little bit more in a paragraph or two, which you can email to the co-chairs and we can send that around. Okay, clearly a controversial issue and we need to, we're not done with it yet. Okay, viability and economies. And I know Abby, I think you and maybe Jake did a lot of work there. So maybe I hand that over to you.
I'm going to request that, Lauren, are you willing to share your screen and help me with this part? So basically, viabilities and economies was quite light on the actions and strategies component. And so a lot of what myself and Jake tried to do was go back to what Task E had talked about in the very beginning of our meetings, which was that we were intending to pull as much as we thought made sense from the 2021 to 2030 farm to plate strategic plan and incorporate that here, because that was a multi-stakeholder process that transpired over 18 months. And it pulled in a lot of different people from a lot of different realms of the food system. And so thinking that at least to a certain extent, a lot of those recommendations from them had been pretty thoroughly vetted. So most of what we did here is just, there's a lot of new things here because I took this opportunity to try to start thinking about, what in terms of what we're elevating into the climate action plan, how do we build out something that makes sense and actually helps us accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. So I guess the broader questions that I came up with were what I said earlier, that, again, there's a lot in here that goes to specifics around resourcing, implementation, TA, funding, regulations, and things like that. And the thing that I kept coming back to was where and how does equity fit into this? And the fact that there are some things I know that we already have in place that we're recommending are built upon things that I don't think were framed with equity. Do we need to, is that part of what some of this work is going back and making sure that on an interagency level, there is an equity component for screening before new things are being implemented, thinking about issues of, for example, BIPOC land access, food insecurity, food apartheid, et cetera. So that's kind of where I'm at. The other thing is, I know that ultimately this ended up adding in more strategies and actions when we're trying to do a less is more approach. And so where there are more granular recommendations about farm to plate, whether it's, specific amounts of money or positions that they're recommending or things, do we want to simply refer them to the farm to plate strategic plan to try to make another sort of collaborative point of, hey, this amazing body of work exists over here and we're thinking that we should reference it as much as possible to try to not reinvent the wheel. So I guess that's sort of where I'm at. This is going to be a really hard one if you haven't had a chance to look at it, which I assume you haven't. So I'm not really sure what to do with that. I really apologize. I couldn't get it to y'all sooner.
No, thanks for doing it. So questions or comments on kind of the the point that Abby made or the work done here. Again, a number of additions pulling from a variety of places. And we want to make sure for these pathways where we haven't spent as much time, we want to make sure we have the time and we have them right. So any questions on these comments? Any concerns about including, maybe I haven't read all the red in there, but any concerns about kind of doing some of these additions?
Hey folks, this is Alyssa.
Hey,
I'm
Alyssa.
calling in from a phone, so I'm having a hard time raising my hand, but if this is a good time, I have a quick response to what Abby just shared.
Yeah, ask.
Okay, great. Thanks, Abby and Jake, for going through the farm to plate and including those pieces. I read through the document last night, and I thought it looked really good. I think my one major comment is that some of the language is like directly pulled from the farm to plate and includes specific like monetary requests, and I think we just need to change that a little bit. It just felt a little odd to have a couple pieces in the document have the really specific monetary requests, but otherwise I just want to appreciate your time in doing that. Thanks.
Abby, is that okay to kind of make these more
Yeah,
parallel?
I totally agree, and I will admit that Jake and I were working at the same time in a Word document as Judson was trying to transfer it into the Excel document, and so yes, there's some more cleanup and edits that need to happen, because that was going to be the thing that I talked to Jake about. Well, we just haven't had that conversation yet, but that was my thinking as well, that we need to sort of not that I don't want to get specific, but I think that's maybe some of those are a little bit too specific for this purpose, particularly given the fact that they exist in a plan elsewhere and can be referenced as such. So that is in my intentions. I just hadn't gotten to it yet. The other thing it made me realize is I did make some referrals from the farm to plate plan to both cross-sector and rural resilience regarding, and just wanted to make sure that everybody was okay with this, sort of regarding some food insecurity pieces in terms of how rural resilience is thinking about community resilience and sort of municipal structures around some of those things. And also to cross-sector regarding, now I'm totally gonna forget, how food system transportation is worked into how they're thinking about transportation planning, I think was the one that I pulled out. And Judson did make a referrals tab. God bless him. Thank you, Judson, so much for doing my work for me.
Jake.
Yeah, just wanted to comment that that not all of these recommendations are necessarily new, in the sense that in our task groups we discussed a lot of these things, and I think as we've moved through like consolidating and then like realizing we need to be more specific, that it seemed appropriate again to call attention to some of the specificity around certain issues. So like technical assistance, we've talked about that, and it's a huge viability and sort of economic development need, and as it relates to this plan. And there are some very known sort of TA needs that were identified in the farm to plate plan that I think is important to sort of have specific, at least sort of product category identifiers for. And I agree that taking out sort of the monetary request makes a lot of sense, and maybe generalizing some language here and there still is appropriate. But yeah, just it felt like we had sort of consolidated so much that we lost some of the directive that I think is actually needed when we talk about viability and economic development for the food system and food security as well.
John Roberts, you had a comment. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I guess two things actually come to mind. One is I think on 10, training farm and business advisors. I mean, on retaining and reducing turnover and labor. I think, is that a place to include maybe some creative thinking about apprenticeships?
I just wanted to say the apprenticeships are mentioned somewhere else in here. I can't remember where. Maybe that's
okay.
Yes, I specifically called out apprenticeships.
Okay, great. The other issue or a couple of things is calling out, emphasizing more attempts to increase. I'm not quite sure how to word this at all, but diversity amongst our employees and members of our community from, all sectors. That's one thought. And the final one was, I'm sort of curious when we call out specific products like pork or because, things change so dramatically over time. Once we were forested, then we were a sheep state, now we're a dairy state, and we will be something else down the road. And I'm just, I just wonder when you specifically name a product, much as I love bacon, just, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah.
Whether it should be more general.
Yeah, on that point, I think that is where kind of oscillating between too general, too specific, that, I think the general need, and it's something I think it is important to call out, is that there is a significant lack of capacity for livestock technical assistance in the state of Vermont. We don't have a livestock specialist at UVM Extension. And so that's a huge gap of developing, just developing kind of that marketplace and the abilities of producers. I think we can kind of generalize that need maybe a little more. It doesn't have to be specific to a pork specialist, but that's, one that is sort of an identified need from the Farm to Place strategic plan that, I think just we could, it adds up to basically saying we need more livestock specialists, technical assistance.
Absolutely agree with that, Jake. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think this is one of those things where Jake and I will, if it's okay, Jake and I will continue to work on getting this sort of to the right level of specificity for our task, and where we need to just specifically reference certain pages of the Farm to Plate strategic plan, so long as that is amenable to everybody. That was sort of more what I wanted to check in on today, is where the comfort level is with referring to the specifics in that plan. The other thing, oh man, I had something I was gonna say to John, was talking about pork and products. Oh, I can't remember.
Why don't we go to Judy, Abby, and we can come back if you remember the other issue. Judy, go ahead.
So I have a question about educating folks for harvesting off the land. TEK and harvesting directly off the land. Is this the place where that should be?
That is in, and I'm sorry because I'm not on the screen, so I can't totally remember where I put it. Judy, I called it, I did, and maybe I need to, I'll write that down. I need to work on the language around that. I did incorporate that, your comments about the further development, understanding, and utilization of other products like sumac spices and birch syrup, et cetera, under a strategy that specifically called out, how we're thinking about equitable access to land, markets, products, et cetera, for either our Indigenous communities or BIPOC communities more broadly. And but I take your point. Maybe there's a place where we need to, I'm not sure if Lauren has it covered in her education tab, but maybe we need to build out a more specific component of how to incorporate TEK into the broader food system scale or harvesting. I'll think about that. It's a great point.
I think the question of kind of harvesting off, Judy, as you said, and maybe a quick scan, I didn't see it explicitly, but I also just looked for it for 1 minute. So I think it's a homework note to note. And I do want to just talk before we go to the next tab. John raised the question of whether do we want to have a more explicit action or recommendation around diversifying the workforce, or whatever the right words are.
Oh, that was the thing I was gonna, this was again where my question came down to, are we going to place that language specifically into separate actions or under specific strategies, or do we want to keep that in our narrative around how our recommendations as a subcommittee should be handled? In other words, if we're considering the guiding principles, if we're considering principles of equity and a just transition, then that would be an automatic component of any decisions that we're making, whether it's with hiring or other aspects. And so that was one clarifying question I think that we as a subcommittee need to consider a little bit, is how, when and where do we get really specific and granular about that, or do we want to approach it as like the working assumption is that that needs to be a consideration in anything moving forward. That's what I was trying to get at earlier.
Maybe some initial thoughts about this, and then we may have to continue to kind of watch for this through the whole piece and the equity screen as well. Any thoughts on that for now? I mean, Abby, my only concern would be if we're not specific about things, then they don't necessarily happen.
That's my number one concern, yeah, for sure. And I think, I know, yes. So, okay, I will move forward with that. Okay. I will add something in specifically about diversity in the workplace, which is, again, an action in the Farm to Plate plan. I just hadn't brought it over yet.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's look at economies. Which I know also, I think Abby, you and Jake did some good work too. Lauren, thanks for keeping notes in the spreadsheets, very helpful. So under economies, Abby and Jake, you want to just kind of describe a little bit what you did, and then we can see if there's brief discussion.
So this was where I think we tried to bring in more things around food hubs, sort of the understanding of the soils and land base that Vermont has, and how we would think about how we can ensure food security for people moving forward in a climate resilient future. And then sort of the, how to put actions in place that will allow us to think strategically around a statewide food system and how to actually get food to people where they are. And I think this is where we put in some things about, Salvation Farm, so gleaning and things like that, which some of the gleaning and the food waste gets complicated because it ties in with emissions reductions that Ryan talked about, but sort of these components of how you build out an actionable, sustainable food system economy.
And Abby, like the previous tab, you guys are going to continue to work and refine these a bit. Is that correct?
That's the plan.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's a lot of work.
Oh, yes. This was the other question I had is around the energy transformation and whether that was being covered somewhere else. And then Judy, this is also where I called out the equitable access to local foods, culturally relevant foods, etc. So maybe I would take any advice as to whether there needs to be something specific about harvesting in that, or whether the harvesting needs to be called out somewhere else.
Well, there has.
I'm asking because I want to make sure we're resourcing Indigenous communities to teach about that, not that we're trying to bring in more white people to teach us how to do that. So that's where I'm thinking about.
Well, the important part about all of that is education, right? Because people who don't know how to harvest sustainably wipe out total communities of plants. And so that's the key. You can't just say, hey, this is a fiddlehead that tastes good and you can harvest it. You got to teach them how to properly harvest and teach them that maybe box settler might make a good syrup replacement or something like that. I mean, people just don't know that stuff. You have to teach them.
I'm guessing that what you're getting at would probably belong or make the most sense in the education tab, if Lauren agrees with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We'll just make sure that we carry it forward from here.
And then this was another question where I had there was a strategy around developing a Vermont food security plan, and centering that within a thriving food system. And obviously that's deeply relevant to us, but I wondered if we should maybe pass those thoughts along to rural resilience as well, just based on its massive importance, particularly as the effects of climate change continue, that we be able to feed our people.
I mean,
And-
maybe to that one, if the group agrees on lines 30, 31, 32 is bring that to rural resilience. If they take it, great. If they don't, then it maybe comes back to this group here. Oh, wait, Lauren, weigh in here.
It's fine to stay here. I just,
Yeah.
It just seems like we have more of the practitioners and
Yep.
expertise in this room, and then it's captured under a 2-sentence charge that we create like local healthy food systems. So that feels like that's part of that, and in statute under our purview.
All right, so we're going to need to add some about sustainable harvesting and kind of really thoughtful education around, harvesting from natural lands. So I think that's where that goes here in education. We'll sort out, but important to include. Okay, anything else on this before I'm gonna have land use go last. I want to go to education and then come back to land use. Okay, so on the education tab, Lauren, was that you?
Yep, I'll just keep on sharing.
All right, bless you.
So education, much like the viability tab, there were a lot of nuggets or components of things that there should be an educational strategy or action around throughout a lot of the pathways that I pulled out and brought over here. I also did add one education action from the Farm to Plate strategic plan and looked at how to strengthen our recommendations around how do we incorporate environmental climate change science into public curriculum through K through 12 and beyond. So I left the little nugget here where and how I think that should be incorporated through the Agency of Education. But largely I separated this into 2 separate strategies. One that's kind of the broad bucket around expanding education, outreach, research, and technical assistance programs. And another that's really focused on how we educate private landowners to make climate smart decisions on their land. And those seem to be the primary strategies that each of the actions would fit under. Most of these under here are the same. There is one, we've talked a lot in this about making sure that cross-sector mitigation is considering strategies to actually reduce energy and material consumption too. And I don't know that that's ever actually been formally sent their way. And I don't think that they've discussed reduction in use or consumption. So I flagged that as something that we might want to send their way, but appreciate Charlie's recommendation from earlier that we have a conversation maybe today at the end of our meeting if we have time of how we're going to send things to other subcommittees and how we follow up on making sure it's been incorporated.
John.
I was just thinking about also educating our young people about exactly where their food comes from, how their food gets there, what goes on a farm as part of this, so they hopefully are aware of the importance of agriculture to in all its wonderful attributes to to their daily lives. And so I'm just wondering about adding that in, not just purely about climate, but kind of extending, having shorter food lines, food is also a benefit, and this is how you support your local farmers, your Vermont farmers. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's fine. I'm wondering how or where you want me to capture that. Is that it seemed like you started going more towards viability than education, but if you think there's an education action here, I'm happy to just make a note to talk to you, or if you have language now, I'm happy to add it.
Well, since I only just thought of it, Lauren, I don't have language right this second. Let me think about that, what I'm really trying to say, and I will either email you or call you.
Do you want me to leave like a breadcrumb so you don't have to I don't just say, hey, what was that thing you were talking about?
I've made a note on my pad here, so I'll be in touch.
There is something in the farm to plate about that as well, which I will try to pull out and send to both of you, and we can work on that language.
Iris, you had a point. You wanted to share what you were thinking there?
Yeah, I think that might be good to add into one of the recommendations going to the Vermont School Board in terms of their content areas, or to the legislature in terms of the content areas that it delegates to the Vermont School Board. And maybe having a specific one for climate change, because there is one for civic engagement and it outlines what is under that. So I think that there's two sort of routes there to maybe incorporate that into K through 12 education.
And Lauren, do you have that, or do you need Iris to write you a sentence, or what would be helpful?
I think I'm going to need Iris's help, but I'll leave a note.
Okay. All right. Great. There's also, I think this question of the promote the reduction in amount of human consumption and wasted energy.
Pat, sorry, could I jump in here? Just to offer,
sure.
Yeah, definitely support which John was sharing. I wonder if spreadsheet line 11, that talks about communicating climate change science and local impact to the general public. I wonder if adding something there about also providing education about the role natural climate solutions and natural and working lands can play in achieving Vermont's climate goals might be good to add there, or if that's already captured in another line. But I think, John, to your point, the education of the role that many of Vermont's natural working lands can play in getting us to an adaptive, resilient future, I think would be good to capture somewhere. And maybe your language will do that. That was just my thought on how to do it. Thanks.
I want to, Lauren, I think it's line 16 in the spreadsheet, I think, at least the one I'm looking at. Maybe it's now 17. Is this the question of promote the reduction in amount of human consumption? Billy noted that's in the land use one as well. Do we leave it in ours? Do we move it to land use? Do we send it off to some other group? So maybe let's look at it in land use, and then we can come back to decide where that action goes. All right, other things on education people want to note, or Lauren, you want to raise?
I don't think specifically, just again to say that there seems to be a lot of opportunity to just educating the general public on what they can do with their land, since there's not really an opportunity to, there's not unlimited resources nor regulatory authority over those spaces, and since so much of our land is privately owned, I think there's a real role to play for education and those materials that can be maybe more intentionally developed and more intentionally communicated to private landowners. So that's kind of where this is.
Great, thanks. Marla, you had your hand up.
I think John did as well, or does he no longer?
No longer, as far as I can tell.
Okay. A couple points. One is in the beginning part of this, you mentioned 2 positions for extension. I'm wondering if we should be a little stronger on the farm viability section. It says fully fund, and I'm not really sure, to be honest, what fully fund means. Fully fund so there are enough people in the state to do the work. If that's true, then we need more positions. I strongly support this aspect and suggest we might want to be more clear if we're willing to put that below as well.
Yeah, Marla, what Lauren's typing there, does that help?
Yep.
Yeah. And then
the second point was line 10 says support increased investment in education and implementation of practices. Does this category of education relate to education of farmers, or is it more the general public? Because there was a strategy in the previous Climate Action Committee about revising some ag agency publications and creating kind of a BMP handbook for farmers. And I don't recall seeing that anyplace else, and would be interested in how Ryan feels about this one as well. I put the link in the, or the section in the chat, language in the chat.
Yeah, I think under education and outreach, well, I can't see which line I'm trying to refer to exactly, but I think that would be an explicit implementation strategy under an action, and definitely support that being part of the rollout. And I think looking at the where are we, education tab, that the where am I looking at? Farmers education outreach line 5, you know, amending that publication as a specific implementation goal. Happy to do so. I think there'll be a lot of planning that happens, you know, once the climate action plan is written, implemented, where I think that would certainly fall under it and be a strategy to get there.
I just keep going back to that climate action plan because so much work went into that. It'd be nice to bring forward some of those recommendations from there where we can.
Other questions or comments? And I thought I heard another voice too. Okay. Lauren, other questions you have for people or anything you want to clarify from what Marley said or others?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, let's, Jake, go for it.
Yeah, just really quick. So to the farm viability, row 4. So the key with that is that it's VHCB that's getting fully funded pursuant to statute, and that in doing so, farm viability then has more resources to add greater business planning technical assistance. And that's, yeah, I think an important clarification. Both those things are important to convey, that, you know, we obviously want VHCB to fully fund it, and part of that is allowing farm viability to be greater, resource to a greater capacity. So one message is to the legislature, one message is kind of to VHCB, that signaling that, you know, there's a need for that capacity to be added, which they're aware of.
Right.
Does that look okay what I typed in, Jake? Also, I'm sure, Billy, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of conservation-based actions and land use, and I assume fully funding VHCB is probably captured under there too.
It is, and there's a reference to the viability program and a carve out for that. So we should just make sure that they align.
Okay.
Good.
Thank
All right, let's in fact do, that's a good link. Let's move to our last full tab, which is land use. So Billy, this was yours.
Billy, if you, oh, okay, you got it.
Can you all see that?
Yep, and Billy, Lauren, Abby put some language from the farm to plate that might be useful to add to the education piece. Just note that's in chat, just so you can note that. That was from Abby. Okay, Billy, yep, if you can make it bigger, maybe, I don't know, 100.
Sure, yeah, I'm on like separate screens, so it's hard for me to tell what's what, but let me know when it's a good size.
Keep going. How does that look to folks?
Does that work?
Beautiful.
Okay, cool. Okay, so similarly, I guess I'll shoot down to the bottom just to show that there's a number of pieces that I'm suggesting we refer to other subcommittees or get moved to different pathways. We can come back to those later. Otherwise, I tweaked the strategies a little, the strategy names a little bit, and in the comment box, I explained kind of what I did. There was certain strategies that only had like one action in them, so it made sense to kind of compile them with others. For the Act 171 work, there's a number of different suggested actions that I kind of combined into one. Here, there's several dealing with Act 250 and other land use regulations. These are all just pulled from our existing lists and, you know, put in this one place. Similarly, there was, a number of different actions related to kind of planning efforts for state and federal lands, and trying to make sure that those actions are tied to the targets in Vermont conservation design. So I tried to be more explicit and put some actual target dates in there. And I called out specifically the collaboration with Green Mountain National Forest. So that combined a couple actions. Here's the action that had been in here regarding supporting efforts for passive management of forest land by fire and copacing. So that's been in here quite some time. There's a composite UVA recommendation. There was a comment on the prior spreadsheet that asked whether there was equity issues here. I'm not exactly sure what that was getting at, but I left that in just to make sure that we didn't lose anything in that regard. Here is the expansion of the flood hazard river corridor rule that Lauren had suggested in another pathway that we brought over to here. So I think this has largely retained the major issues that folks have recommended all along, just cleaned it up a little bit. Moving into investment and conservation, again, I kind of slightly revised the strategy language to make it more inclusive of a range of different things we're trying to accomplish, a little bit more specific, actionable. It has a lot of all the stuff we've been talking about, goals to achieve the kind of VCD targets for old forest, for conservation efforts. This number 29 does talk about fully funding VHCB. A question I had there for the group is, whether you all think that's adequate. I know VHCB got significant amount of one-time funding in the current state fiscal year that has allowed them to really leverage federal LWCF funds for conservation and make some big one-time investments. And given our desire to kind of work towards the 30 by 30 targets, which are incredibly aggressive, do we want to recommend not only the kind of statutory funding for the board or more? So that's probably a question that we should consider as we work to finalize our recommendations, given that they're such a prime funder in this space.
John Roberts, you have a question or comment?
Just a question, Billy, well, for everybody, and I'm not sure whether land use, but I think it's the right places, whether we should have something in here about developing, exploring and developing a retirement program for farmers, for agricultural producers to try and reduce the incentive to, if there is an incentive, to sell their land for development. Farmers tend to hold on to their farms to the last minute.
Right.
And then they don't really have a plan, or many of them don't have a plan of what is going to happen to that farmland. So I'm just, if our goal is to keep working lands working, maybe that's something, some sort of retirement program would be worth exploring. So that's my comment.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And if you look here down at line 35, I did put a more kind of explicit action to support implementation of the intergenerational transfer of forest working groups recommendations of 2017. That was focused on kind of forest landowners, but has lots of good stuff regarding estate planning, tax benefits to kind of transfer lands intact and in working use. But we could certainly add something focused specifically on, farmland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah,
you got it. And just before we move on from the VHCB one, I think another question is whether we want to recommend, not only funding the board, but how they target those dollars. As many of you who work with VHCB for years know, much of the state funds goes to match NRCS farmland conservation. The remaining funds go to a mix of historic preservation, public recreation, and then kind of natural area conservation. Do we want to recommend they juice up their work around kind of either meeting VCD goals or climate investments and conservation? So I see Abby's got her hands up, but that's a question to you all.
Abby, over to you.
I think that I would love to add language to bolster out their capacity to be more nimble in how they're able to use the dollars that they have regarding climate resilience. I also think that that can become relevant with BIPOC land access. And I just think there are a number of things that that we've found in now going through, I don't know, 2 conservation easement processes, I think it is, that it can get really, really specific to the detriment of the whole farm or the whole ecosystem approach. And so anything we can do to build out their capacity in that regard to be more flexible in how they approach the land base for ecosystem function, I think would be deeply beneficial to the goals we're trying to accomplish here. And I would second John's farmer retirement thing. That was he was listening in testimony. That was my dad's idea.
Right. David Mears.
I just want to respond to the part of Billy's question about whether we should recommend increasing Bhcb funds. I do think I think that's a good specific idea. And in general, also, I think it's, as we think about strategies for increasing investment in land conservation, working with existing programs that have existing infrastructure and can scale up easily is a good strategy. So I think we should absolutely be recommending an increase in the amount of funding that goes to Bhcb.
All right. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, and let me just keep moving down here. Charlie, before I move on.
That's okay. If you want to finish, I was going to go back to the UVA ones, just following up on a conversation from an earlier tab, but if you want to finish.
Then at the bottom, we have this strategy related to minimizing and mitigating impacts of renewable energy generation. It's a little solar focused. We might want to broaden it. But I did add some language here related to not only incentivizing solar on new structures or previously disturbed sites, but incentivizing the avoidance and minimization of forest clearing for those activities, because that's an issue we're starting to see more and more of. Ryan.
Sorry, I was going to Ryan, go ahead. I have another question then Charlie. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I have a separate question about the first strategy, if that's all right to ask about within F.
Yep.
At the very top, sure.
Yeah, very top. So in trying to build state policy of no net loss of natural and working lands, line 15, balanced against the development and implement a net gain wetland policy of line 20. The aspirations for a net gain line in 15, I don't think these are in any way at odds, but I do think 15 provides the framework for which a comprehensive and balanced planning for fluxes between land uses with a goal towards net gains of natural resources is going to be successful. And so I'm not sure if line 20 is a legacy. I believe that's the start of the discussion 2 weeks ago about where we ended up at line 15. And so and we currently have a net gain in wetlands, so rest assured we're not losing wetlands in the interim. But I think line 15 better represents the pathway to get towards that action and goal, and that policy shouldn't be developed line 20 and without considering those other natural and working land.
So we should just strike that one and then it's folded into that other one as noted. Okay.
I think it's best represented in 15. That's my perspective.
Charlie, I think over to you.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, I think our existing state policy is no net loss of wetlands. There's certainly been conversation about changing that policy. But
I didn't say the policy. I said the current state of significant wetlands. We have a net gain of tract wetlands in the state. I know it's no net loss. So just we're not losing wetlands at the moment was what I said.
So I'm happy to put this comment in here and kind of defer to others who were kind of advocating for line 20 on their thoughts, but you know, I'm fine going wherever the group wants to go. And this can be something that is on the way to do given the time.
So again, we've got kind of a comprehensive thinking about trade-offs between sort of, you know, conservation choices among different land types. So I think we've got that in 15. Anybody concerned about striking 20 because it's in fact folded into 15?
I'd actually like a little more time with that before I feel comfortable striking it.
Why don't we just maybe Billy, what we could do is move it right next to 15, just in terms of location, and then we can just leave them there for now. We can have them kind of together so people can see them, that they might be connected. Charlie.
Thanks, Pat. So spreadsheet line, oh, it's changing. One right below that. Yeah. The one that deals with UVA stuff. What I'd recommend is that we actually take that out. We create a specific strategy that addresses basically how the UVA program can address or help meet climate objectives. We can figure the language out. We take each one of these three things under it, we make it an action under the new strategy. And then I would also float that we add another action tucked in here. Number 2 in there talks about encouraging permanent conservation by easement for parcels that meet old forest conditions. I think that's okay to leave, but I'd also add another action under this one that basically just says that a parcel of land which is subject to a forever wild easement held by a qualified, you know, land trust be eligible for enrollment in UVA under the conservation category. It gets to a similar end as what's described above, but it's a slightly different means. Basically that, you know, if the landowner goes through the processes of putting a forever wild easement on a property held by a qualified organization, then they should be allowed enrollment under the conservation category.
Okay. So what about the idea that Charlie said that we're going to fold this out into a strategy, something about using UVA to address climate, and then it's got several sections underneath. Anybody would object to creating that new strategy just for UVA?
And I'm happy to draft some language and circulate this again.
Okay. Jake had a comment about VHB too, that maybe is worth just noting for further work on that one.
Yeah, just a quick comment to my comment. My concern is that if we just say to, you know, if the recommendation is to increase the funding, to be clear that, you know, we're increasing above the increase that would come from actually fulfilling the funding formula, because, you know, meeting the funding formula in and of itself, it would be an increase. So just, you know, wanting to be really clear and specific then as to what the additive amount, you know, would be in doing that.
Okay. With the other recommendation that said fully funded the statutory requirement, which may not be 3 million, maybe it's, I don't know, 1.5, whatever, right? So that's, Jake, I think you're saying.
Okay. So I just added, you know, increase above the statutory formula.
Yeah, great, thanks. Okay. Thanks, Billy.
Great. And then Charlie, is that a residual hand? Cool. So I guess just in the interest of time, if folks want to go down to, you know, actions that are being referred to other subcommittees, just to make sure people are comfortable with what's being proposed here, notwithstanding the conversation of how we're going to make those referrals.
Again, these, I think, for the rural resilience, those are mostly, I assume, built environment issues, Billy. That's why they're there.
Correct. And the cross-sector ones, you know, deal with the actual kind of technology associated with electric generation and storage. So that seemed like something that they would have the most influence over. I'm certainly open to not making those referrals and including them in our actions if that's the preference of the group, but this seemed like the way to go, given the referrals that we've discussed.
What do people think? Do you want to, they may fit better in either in land, or they may fit better actually under the energy one. I don't know, but energy and materials maybe, but how do people feel?
Do that, right?
I have already made some of these recommendations to cross-sector, and they're not interested in them.
In which case, if this group is, we should leave it in.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. So I've talked to them about solar panels and batteries and unsustainable methods of harvesting, and they're not really interested in that. They listened to me like I was a cute little old lady and dismissed everything I said.
Group, what if we take, was this line 30 for 51 through 53, and I think they probably fit better under energy and materials under pathway C, but then they would go in one, either in own strategy, or they would go in one of those strategies in this particular subcommittee's work.
I think to support our sweet, adorable old lady, or however she just referred to herself, let's put them in our group's components of renewable energy, et cetera, so that I still think we should try to refer them to cross-sector, because regardless of whether they wish to listen or not, I think it's important that we, that this comes from us as we feel this is important. And also I would recommend keeping it here as well.
Great. Anybody, maybe we do both, and that way for certain, if the system doesn't take them up, they won't be lost. But if they do, that would be great, and we will still have them in our plan. Iris, did you have Iris, one more thought that I think you had in the chat? You want to share that?
Yeah, I just think that maybe a more specific policy that we could recommend they pursue as a recommendation would be to develop extended producer responsibility to pass along to the legislature for the given technologies, because I think that's something that we should be exploring for all of them, but specifically for solar panels and batteries.
Very well, Billy, fill that out. Thanks, Iris. Good suggestion. Okay. All right. And then there's a number of ones up there that are rural resilience, which are really focused on the built environment. Okay, I'm aware of the. Let's see, it's almost 11, right? Yeah, so it is 11. So I thought maybe if people are up for it, we'll take public comment. Talk briefly about kind of what next on this, take a quick break, and then we're going to go to the prioritization that we'll be moving forward into. So Billy, are you ready, and Abby, to take public comment?
Yeah, that would be great. Folks who are interested in sharing some thoughts, please raise your Zoom hands or make yourself known otherwise. See Cheryl and Jennifer so far. Anyone else? Okay, Cheryl, why don't you go ahead first, and then Jennifer, you can go second.
Hi, everybody. I just have one real quick comment, which is that I don't have a comment right now about the things that we've been talking about. I did put a few things in the chat, and my request is that possibly you just save chat and then make sure you take those as comments, because a lot of people, not just public, you all are putting very important things in there. So I've taken notes, but I request that you also just save chat and look at our comments in that as we put them in. Is that okay?
Jane and Marion, how are chat comments being handled in terms of just general for the subcommittees? Marion or Jane?
I was being quiet because I was hoping Marion would speak up first.
We can save the chat and share it with the subcommittees. We don't have a consistent sort of approach or policy for them, or haven't thus far. But if the subcommittee wants access to them, I can certainly download it and share it with them. I've done it for a couple subcommittees in certain meetings, but it's not really something we do consistently, but could certainly share it with you all if you want it.
Yeah, I guess my request was because of I think Pat was who said, well, we don't have time to do all the, address the comments in the chat, but please save them for this public comment time. So that's what I was referring to, and other times as well, That's it.
And I think the chat is a very useful record of some ideas, thoughts that we don't always have time to actually verbally get to.
Okay, thanks.
No, good. Cheryl, anything else?
Okay, Jennifer, go ahead. Then I see Zach is interested as well. He can follow Jennifer.
Thanks so much, everyone. Good morning. And I first wanted to really thank Billy for the revisions on the land use segment, and particularly thinking about the UVA and thinking also about Charlie's. I'm again just really excited about the prospect of thinking about incorporating forest management that speaks to climate change, and that management might in some cases mean not harvesting at all, or it might, as you mentioned, Bill Keaton's work might incorporate some management strategies that enforce that. So I'm really excited about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the dilemma of wood and the use of wood for electricity. And so when we're thinking about biomass, highly discourage that inefficient process. And I'm going to put in the chat a film, which is by Vermont filmmakers Lisa Merton and Alan Dater. And it's called Burned: Are Trees the New Coal? There's just a lot of information on the website. Issues in Europe, issues in the Southeast in terms of harvesting large segments of forest. This has not happened in Vermont, but I think we can be at the forefront of thinking about that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, the final thing, had to do with that question of whether diversity and equity are a working assumption with everything, and when that needs to be inserted in each of the strategies and each of the actions. And I just think it's a big dilemma that you'll have to wrestle with and are wrestling with. So thank you very much.
Zach, maybe you're up next.
Yeah, Zach, go ahead, and then we can come back to Judy's question. Thanks.
Okay, and Charlie, were you responding to Jennifer directly? Did you want to go before me?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, and I think Jennifer pointed this out, the film Burned presents a lot of information, and in some cases, it's not quite clear that some of the management practices that are being demonstrated there are what's occurring here, and it tends to kind of, again, lump a lot of things that are kind of nuanced together into one bucket. The film, has a pretty strong, stance on what it's taking a look at, which is totally its right. But just if you do watch it, understand that some of the stuff presented there is not what is happening in Vermont. So take it with a grain of salt. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Zach Porter with Conservation Law Foundation, and appreciate the good conversation this morning and a lot of good substance. On that last point, just to pick up on biomass, I think I just want to say I really appreciate the concerns that Judy raised today, and would be happy to provide, CLF has previously provided pretty detailed comments about biomass electricity generation, but I encourage you to, look at those comments. I'll try to submit additional comments that clarify, the health impacts as well as the carbon emissions, which are 1.5 times the emissions of coal-fired power from a facility like Rygate or a facility like McNeil. The American Lung Association opposes biomass for electricity generation. That should be all we need to know to make sure that we don't have more of that kind of electricity generation in Vermont. And it does have ecological impacts already here in Vermont, and it would have more if we expanded that kind of energy generation. So I also just wanted to say I really appreciate the suggestions that were made today about updating the required agricultural practices. Appreciate Charlie's desire to look into opportunities through UVA for changes that could help realize our climate change goals through forest management. And the VCD targets, putting those into the plan is also fantastic to see. And I think that makes Vermont a leader nationwide with climate action plans if we can incorporate those types of goals into this plan. So that would catapult us ahead of some of our neighbors in New England, and I'm certain put us ahead of others across the country if we were able to put that kind of quality of targets into this plan. I'd push for something even stronger, because the 30 by 30 global deal for nature calls for even more than the 9% that's in the Vermont Conservation Design Report, but 9% is still a 6% improvement on what we have today. So still progress in the right direction, certainly. So thank you for that. And I think just, lastly, well, I'll leave it there. I really appreciate the good substantive discussion today. Thank you.
All right, a few things before we take a quick, before we take a quick break. So Judy, you had a question about kind of anything that got left out. So over to you.
Yeah, I just wondered, we have this detailed list of what people see as priorities. I just wondered if there's a detailed list of what was left out or reworded.
So the folks who worked on the spreadsheet, can you speak to kind of like kind of how things, if anything got lost, how we captured kind of previous work, so we are clear about where kind of how we're tracking all this stuff?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we all did it slightly differently and then tried to capture that after the fact. And if you look in many of the tabs, there's text that's shown in red, that's an addition. There's pieces that have a strike through that indicates a deletion. I need to still go back through the land use tab and do more of that, because I don't know if I did that in an exhaustive way, but I think that was everyone's intent, was to try to show where something was either moved and indicate as much, or strike through what was deleted, or kind of add in red what was added. I know I need to go back and double check that work for myself, and others may as well, but that's probably something we can do as we pull this whole thing together based on today's comments and get one more kind of version out that captures all that.
Yeah, I wonder if, really to that point, if people did strike something out, if it says struck out, then it has like in a little note to the side, like we asked, like Jake asked for something, like it was moved to, or it was folded under, or whatever. So when people see a strikeout, they know what happened to it or where it might go, in as much as they can. So in terms of this sheet, are the folks who took the lead in kind of drafting each section, are you going to take the good comments from the work group today, try to be really clear about kind of the origins and endpoints of all this stuff, so we don't lose anything, and have that ready? We'll talk about scheduling a little bit, but probably by very early next week to continue to work on the prioritization. Are you all able and willing to do that?
Yeah, I think I was hoping we would discuss that later, but that's my sense of what we'll need to do. And to Lauren's good comment, we have, none of the older versions are gone. We have like the whole breadcrumb trail from day one of all the different versions in case we need to refer to them.
One thing I did note, just to Judy's point, Judy had sent some specific and separate comments on wind, which I think need to get folded into, I didn't see them, so they need to get folded into one of the pathways. I'm just not sure which one. And yeah, Judy last week had sent an email, I think on Thursday, regarding 3 or 4 specific suggestions around wind.
I'll try to dig those up. Thanks.
Okay.
I just don't want to not have anything in there in wind and have somebody down the road think, oh, they never discussed it, so it's not an issue, it's not a concern.
No, good suggestion. Thank you. I'll pull those up and get those in there. And then I do think that maybe Donna was a member of the public who did want to share some thoughts. So I don't know, Pat, if we've got time to kind of give her a shot real quickly.
You bet. Donna, why don't we do that? And Zach, if you can be really brief, only because of time afterwards, sure. And then we want to take a break and dive into prioritization. Donna.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to comment here. I did put my thoughts into the chat column, but I'd like to just put them here forward verbally too. I am really grateful to Charlie that to present the idea of letting lands with forever wild easements into the current use program. I am in full support of that, as well as opening up a category of wildland reserve in the program as well. And I also appreciate the discussion about biomass and looking into the details of that further and encouraging it to be phased out in the state. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And maybe Zach, a quick last point you want to make?
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to echo Donna's comments and just say that specifically, I just wanted to, reiterate that the way that the current use focused language here is written in the plan right now, and I know that Charlie's going to address this, but just to make it clear for everyone, the way that this is designed, it will not be of much use to very many Vermonters who otherwise qualify for use value appraisal. All you should need is 25 acres of forest land to qualify to enroll in a new wildland category or to put a forever wild easement and still be enrolled in UVA. But as this is written right now, that would not be the case. And many Vermonters would not be able to take advantage of this. And that's in contrast to the fact that any Vermonter through UVA can log their land. So if we really want to value all of these different strategies for climate, resilience and mitigation, let's put everything on an equal playing field so that all Vermonters can participate in UVA. We make it that much more an attractive program. But thanks, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, co-chairs, what do you think about maybe a 5-minute break, and then at 11:20 we'll hear about the prioritization process and the equity screening process going forward?
Sure.
With me.
Okay. All right, so 11:20, everybody, let's start up again. And Jane and Marion, we'll turn it over to you at that point. Thank you all. Okay, Jane and or Marion, turn it over to one of you.
Jane is going to present, so I don't know if she's on yet.
Oh, okay.
Just give her a second.
So as we're waiting for the folks who worked on the various tabs of the matrix, did you all capture your own notes? Were we relying on someone like Lauren to kind of be a central note taker? If the latter, Lauren, I don't know if you could kind of send whatever you did out to that group today, but hopefully we each have our own notes, and then we can talk with Pat about how we pull this all together a little later this morning.
Lauren, did you take notes in the shared file or in your own Excel spreadsheet?
I took it in my own Excel spreadsheet for the pathways, that me and Abby were responsible for. So I can translate those into the SharePoint site.
Okay. Abby, are you okay? Is that helpful to you, or is it easier to just have Lauren send you the spreadsheet? What's easier for you, Abby?
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I took my own notes. I have a separate question when it's okay.
Yep, no, I think you're the co-chair. You can jump at any time.
Ha! Howard, no. We keep talking about wildlands, and this is something that Judy has been so good about educating me about with this. I realized that I don't know what our working definition is of wildlands. And I think for the purpose of this exercise, again, that might be one of those terms that we need to have called out both in our part of the climate action plan so that it's accessible to the public in that way, and for my own understanding so that I know exactly what it is that we mean when we're talking about a wildland. It is a confusing term for a person like me. Thanks.
Abby, and does someone have a working definition we can draw from? Charlie, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I believe that in its most common usage, when people talk about wildlands, they're essentially talking about passively managed areas, as in no active management, hands off, self-willed is how some people call it, but essentially lands that are passively managed, meaning they're allowed to just do as they might.
I don't know, Abby, when are we going to assign someone? I don't know quite where, maybe this ends up being in the narrative we write. I don't know, but in terms of how we kind of get that defined.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something that should, yeah, I'm not, there's some historical context to that notion that can be construed as quite problematic. So I think we want to be a bit careful in how we handle that. And I think we just, again, for transparency's sake, want to be very clear about how we're referring to wildlands in the context of our recommendations. And whoever can come up with that definition, go forth.
Charlie, do you have a comment to that?
Yeah, I'd love to know more about that, because that's the first I've heard that. But again, I'm not totally surprised by a lot of the things that we use in general terminology. But I think maybe the division that we can use here is when we're talking about management activities, specifically using the term passive management. And then when we're talking about easements, using the terminology that's specific to forever wild easements, if that can help, and kind of maybe taking the wildlands catch-all phrase out of it.
Abby, maybe a comment to that. I just want to maybe move on, but I think we kind of note this is another thing we have to address. And Judy has a point too. So Abby, any follow on to Charlie's, then I'll go to Judy.
No, I don't have any preference about this. I'm just trying to flag potential issues, confusion, transparency needs, accountability needs. That's what I see my job as.
No problem. Judy.
This is a concern to me as well. Our forms of conservation before contact period was the watershed was divided into quarters, and each quarter was lightly lived and lightly used, and then we moved on, so there was no hardship to any other quarter of the watershed. The problem with that is that when colonizers came, they were told if the land is uninhabited and unused, it's theirs for the taking. And so they took it because conservation was occurring. And so I just want to know what the definition means as well, because my backyard of 100 acres is lightly used. And do you call it wildlands, or do you call it my backyard?
So I think we have a number of terms here: lightly used, sustainably used, passively managed. I don't know what the words are for sure at all. I don't know if there's any. Ali, you put a few things in chat, so only because of that I'm going to single you out. I don't know if you have some working language you've thought of that you could suggest for the group, or if someone does, just so we can. And we will, as we write up, we'll have to be more precise potentially in our language in a few areas, including this one.
No, I don't necessarily have a definition, but I do think Abby's point of just being very clear with what we mean by these terms is super important as we're talking about land decisions and allocation of funding. So there are probably definitions we can glean online from other groups who have looked into this, but yeah, we just want to be very clear about what we mean by that as far as, human influences, because certain things get put in different buckets than others.
And Abby, one potentially, and again, we have to watch how long the narrative for this section is, but you certainly we could even talk about language in a few sentences if Jane and Marion think it's appropriate, and say, we've used these terms for this purposes, but want to be aware, somewhat of what Judy's point said, that when we think about land use over time and including pre-colonization, it can be very, very different frames of reference.
Yeah, and I guess it's just, it gets into all sorts of things. I mean, there's plenty of land on our conservation easement that we literally never touch, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what the ramifications are for our conservation easement. I don't know what that means. It can get, at some point, I just think we need kind of a glossary of terms about how we're breaking some of these components out, so that when we're talking about funding, when we're talking about technical assistance, when we're taking this to the legislature, it's very clear to what, to whom, how we're framing the work that we want to see done.
A quick point, Jane just put the point that the CAP will have a glossary of terms, and this may be where we want to add to that. So I think co-chairs, maybe we're going to have to put this as homework, but that specific terms we want to define that may go into that glossary, we should probably begin to sort out. So I think for now, let's note that, but I think really important. And again, the careful, we may have to go back to the whole document and look at the use of language, and then maybe some kind of precision we're gonna have to bring that we may not have right now. Okay, so Jane, do you want to talk about kind of the Climate Council's direction to us about prioritization?
Yes, sorry, I took a bite. Morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me join in. So we've talked a little bit here and there at the subcommittee, and every meeting's starting to blur together a bit to me now around how much level of detail we've gone into around prioritization to date. But what I wanted to do was orient you to where we are in the process and the action that the council took on Tuesday of this week. And then if it made sense, my plan was to go through just a very short couple of slides about the prioritization process, and then yield the time to really have a conversation with all of you around how that process will play out for the subcommittee. And Pat, Marion, and I, along with Billy and Abby, have been talking through some suggested approaches that we could use for the subcommittee in order to do some independent work on prioritization between this week and next. So last week, I believe we shared with all of you ahead of your meeting the slides that we intended to use to discuss the prioritization framework, as well as a associated Word document that broke down the definitions that we were proposing for the foundational criteria that would then inform how you reviewed and ranked individual actions. As a reminder, all pathways and strategies will be in the body of the climate action plan, and what we're trying to get to is a succinct set of priority actions to put forward in the document. And so that went, I had some feedback from subcommittee members after having shared that with your subcommittee, Ag and Eco, Rural Resilience and Cross Sector, as well as Just Transitions. And about, I think, a handful of subcommittee members sent me some specific comments around language and the definitions. I made those revisions ahead of the council meeting on Tuesday, and then the council itself reviewed the definitions for the foundational criteria and made some comments around a number of considerations, largely speaking to how we roll up the final prioritization, as well as how we consider cost effectiveness, the definition there, and how we consider cost of inaction in the impact definition. I've made those revisions, and Marion and I reviewed those together, and Marion updated the link on your website for today's agenda, so that what you're seeing now is a revised version of definitions. At this point, we consider final, that has the council's approval, barring those updates which we have made. And so if my preference here would be to talk through the process for all of you, recognizing that the critical junction now is to elevate the high priority actions so that you can then come to consensus around the conversation you want to have and what actions you want to discuss with Kaya, who is scheduled to work with all of you, not next week, but the following week, on the substantive format to use the scoring rubric. And so if that makes sense, I'm happy to sort of step through just the 3 slides that we have around the prioritization process and how that will work, referencing the definitions that are now updated on your linked in your agenda. And then we can turn it over to Billy and Abby and Pat around a suggested approach for this subcommittee to move forward with actually doing the prioritization.
All right.
Not hearing any objections, so I'm going to go for it. So a reminder, like I just said, all your pathways and strategies will fold into the climate action plan, and that you all have done that good work already of consolidating and breaking down the work so that we have a strategic set of pathways and strategies to advance into the body of the climate action plan. I'll say that hopefully later today, Marion and I will be sharing out specific CAP drafting guidance that will speak to a revised CAP outline that we've been working on with the cross-cutting counselor group that we have together, sort of refining and making sure that CAP outline is representative of how we want to be thinking about the cumulative impact of cross-cutting pathways, as well as fleshing out the implementation section of the climate action plan. So along with that, we've also heard loud and clear that subcommittee members, counselors, folks who are contributing to drafting the climate action plan want specific guidance on what that all looks like. What does a pathway look like in the climate action plan? What is the strategy? And then we've also proposed how to format actions and what that will look like under each strategy, the action tables, and how you'll speak to these foundational criteria and your prioritization in the climate action plan. So that specific guidance is developed, and we just need to share it with all the subcommittees at this point. The actions now that you just went through today and sort of stuff through and hopefully have come close to finalizing, those are at the level of which you'll handle the prioritization. And so it's going to happen as a stepwise approach with respect to the recognition that we don't want to pull equity out. It's embedded in the foundational criteria associated with co-benefits. It's embedded in cost effectiveness definition as well. But that real scrutiny of equity using the scoring rubric will happen after you've evaluated the 4 definitions around impact, cost effectiveness, co-benefits, and technical feasibility. And therefore have elevated that suite of high priority actions. All high priority actions will carry into the body of the climate action plan, but you all as a subcommittee, recognizing that the prioritization is not perfect, that you still might want to reach consensus around additional medium and low priority. And originally we had just been thinking about consensus around some medium priority actions that you would carry into the body of the CAP, but recognizing that the prioritization isn't perfect, we saw it work out because cross sectors already prioritized their actions. Yesterday, we've sort of broken it down to just say medium and low, and that those would have to be advocated by the group in a form that the whole subcommittee would reach consensus on any additional medium or low priority actions that would actually move forward as in the body of the climate action plan. And those ones will all be prioritized for equity screening. And Kaya isn't here today, couldn't be here today, but I can sort of suggest how that might work. So this is the approach that I believe most of you have seen to date, but the consolidation, you now have that your matrix that has all of your pathways, strategies, and actions in one place. The next step is going to be to screen out actions that are at an individual level or don't have a clear implementing authority, so don't have a clear state agency, nonprofit, municipal or regional level to actually run with those ideas. We're not going to take those away. We just feel like those aren't a component of your specific actions, and we want to pull together and represent the cumulative benefit of all those personal choices and actions that we need to make in one section of the climate action plan, and speak to those cross-cutting across all the work of the different subcommittees. And you'll see that reflected in the updated climate action plan outline. So pull those out because we don't have to run those through prioritization. We're going to put those all together in one place automatically. And then you're going to focus your analysis on those 4 criteria definitions, and they're all broken out by high, medium, and low at the definitions. And the definitions give you clear guidance on how to evaluate every action by high, medium, and low, or high and moderate and low. And technical feasibility is just a yes or no question, and I don't imagine that really is very applicable to your actions. It's really around cross-sector mitigation ideas. And it's spoken to explicitly in the GWSA. So, and the way we've very narrowly defined it here, it should be pretty straightforward that all of yours will be yes. Those high priority actions, as well as the medium and low that you want to move forward with, you as a group will review those and next week. So we're talking about prioritization happening between this week and next week. And we're going to talk about how to do that in an efficient way, and then come back together as a group next week in order to review and ensure that we've accurately elevated the actions we want to and have a cumulative amount of work to speak to, and then have you all in that conversation be elevating and flagging what you want to do the scoring rubric with Kaya the following week, recognizing that Kaya will not be able to walk you through using the scoring rubric on all your high priority actions, and that that benefit of that conversation with Kaya will really be to help give you the confidence to actually use the scoring rubric yourself, because the expectation is that all actions that are in the body of the CAP for moving forward will be reviewed and used the scoring rubric on, and some of that will have to happen without Kaya's support as well, and that will happen independently and come back as a group to reflect on. So the important part of all of this is that we're going to want to be transparent and show our work and review of all of these foundational criteria. In some cases, that has meant for subcommittees having these columns built into their spreadsheet. And so Marianne is gracious enough to offer to take your template and build those columns in along with comment sections, which is how Cross Sector has done it. We also recognize that Excel can be really unruly and challenging, and have some other suggested approaches that might make sense for the subcommittee as well, to ensure that everybody feels comfortable doing the screening across the 4 definitions in a high, medium, and low, and is able to actually memorialize that in some fashion. I'll pause here since I see Charlie has his hand up.
Exactly. Charlie, go for it.
I just wanted to clarify on the part 2, the screening here around clear implementing authority. Are we saying that in terms of state implementing authority, like something tied to state government and agencies and departments? Or are we also saying implementing authorities could be other kind of partner organizations like the Vermont Land Trust, NOFA Vermont? Because I think there's a middle ground between kind of something that FPR would do and then something an individual would do, but there's partners. So are we carving that separate, or what's that look like?
Yes, and in the CAP drafting guidance that we have, we've suggested bucket, I think there's, Marion might remember offhand, but I think there's 5 suggested implementing buckets, recognizing that 100% this is not a state plan, it's an all hands on deck plan, and so that implementer can be various organizations and authorities outside of state government. And I think we have nonprofit, municipal, regional, legislature, and rulemaking is also one, so the legislature itself.
Awesome, thanks.
Judy.
I don't see in here what we talked about last week was keeping track of what gets bumped out for a minority report.
So if you mean what gets bumped out with respect to low priority actions, those, I think it's not here. Here it is on this next screen. All remaining medium and low priority actions will be maintained in an appendix for future climate action plans to consider. And I should say, in addition to future climate action plans, other implementers could see those actions as good ideas as well and pick them up and run with them. But if that's what you mean, that's what we're suggesting, that all actions will be captured in an appendix, but only the high priority ones would be elevated into the body of the plan.
Right, but last week I asked if there would be a minority report issued, and you said yes.
I guess I'm
That's
not
for the action.
sure what you
That's
mean,
the
Ryan.
actual climate action plan. I think there's the opportunity for through the decision-making process for the full council to issue kind of some sort of dissenting opinion or something like that. Is that correct, Jan?
Yeah. Yes, that is one of the parts of the decision-making model.
Judy, are you asking if the same thing will exist for our subcommittee?
Yes, I want to know if all of these minority opinions that get low will be put together in a report for the general public to see and review. A minority report.
just to be clear, because I think we're talking about all the actions that are not agreed upon by your group to be carried forward into the body of the climate action plan. So those ones that there's sort of just like you would like to, someone would want to see some of the lower medium priorities as high priorities. You want to make sure that that's reflected somewhere. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
In all honesty, I haven't really thought through how the decision-making model as how you're going to reflect that in a spreadsheet or not around low and medium priority actions for every single one. Where you move to a vote, I would imagine that that would be reflected when and if you have to move to a vote across all subcommittee members around a specific action. That could be reflected in the spreadsheet, that there was a vote taken and there was different opinion and what the vote, how to capture that vote.
Which is what I asked you last week, and you said yes.
Come on.
I think that was
I guess we have a clear process for dissenting opinions at the council level. I'm having a harder time seeing, like, at the subcommittee level, like having multiple minority opinion reports. So I'm trying to reconcile how that would all work.
Well, here's I don't know if this is going to help, but I think when we come to prioritization, everything's going to, everything that we have in the matrix will stay in the matrix and be part of the report, but some of it will be medium low. So it'll be kind of embedded, or one could argue lost or harder to see. In our group, there's two possible challenges, right? One is either there's something that people think should not be in the matrix at all at the end of the day, and some people think it should. So we'll have to wrestle with that question. And then the second question is, we might have a disagreement about like high ranking versus medium ranking, right? In terms of what kind of is forwarded, what's not. So I want to turn to the co-chairs, but it seems what would be important if there's issue X, Y, and Z important to someone that did not reach high ranking, but caused kind of a lot of conversation among us, whether the co-chairs have a way to at least bring that to the council to note it. I don't know whether in writing, verbally, or both, but I don't know, co-chairs, what you think is if we don't have full agreement on, say, the top priorities, how do we handle those things where we have strong differences of opinion?
Well, I think this is where it gets difficult about how we break out honoring the work that's been done in the subcommittee and the, capturing the vote, if you will, or where there are dissenting opinions versus, how do I say this? The council is not working with the expertise that we have here, and therefore them weighing in on something that we've decided is a split thing here, to me only confuses the issue. It doesn't actually get us to like where we need to go in terms of trying to figure out what the way forward is or the solution is. So I would advocate, and I'm not sure that I know what Jane is saying about sort of logistically how to manage that. I guess I would say that as best as I can figure, it would need to be reflected in the matrix, because I know, but that doesn't address it in the climate action plan, but that would at least have it so that there was documentation that could exist for the public to go back to see where the disagreements lied. It seems very clear to me that it's going to be important to have that captured somehow, somewhere.
Exactly. And major committees addressing issues like this often have a minority report that talks about the disagreements and why. And I asked for that last week.
So I guess I have no problem with a minority report. The question for me gets at just where it goes. And I guess my question back to all of you is, the low and medium priority actions will be viewed in an appendix of this document. And I think that creating that minority report along with it in the appendix makes sense to me. But I guess the question is how to elevate and where it makes sense to elevate that disagreement in the body of the climate action plan. And that's something that I think we should give a little more thought to, because we want to be really careful about how and where dissenting opinions are put forward in the body of the climate action plan. So it's a consensus plan that is being adopted. So what I would suggest is that I'm more than happy to work with Marion and Abby and Billy to put forward a clear process as you start to get into the prioritization component and start to have to flesh out where you vote and where there's conflicting opinions, and make sure that we have agreement as we do that on how those opinions are going to be clearly represented in the document going forward. But since we're just running up against the clock right now, I might suggest that we pivot into speaking about the process for actually doing prioritization between now and next week, since the timing is of essence. And I'm happy to suggest what has been discussed, but also happy to have Pat or Billy and Abby sort of pick up on the theme of what we were thinking about with respect to organizing around pathways and the buckets introduced.
Yep. And let me just note to close this conversation. I think there's two and maybe three things that we need to share to the Climate Council. One is obviously the narrative that will be written as part of the chapters relevant to this works group. There's the matrix, and then there's this issues, differences of opinion, disagreements, minority report, whatever it is. And again, whether that ends up in the climate report, I maybe the Climate Council is going to have to figure out. But I think for this group, if we can commit now that if there are outstanding issues, we have to find a way to frame them and capture them to share with the council. I think co-chairs, is that something we can maybe think a little bit more back to make sure we have a really clear operational answer for Judy when we come back next week?
Yes. I don't have any brilliant solutions at the moment, but I'll continue to think on it. But yes, I think I'll keep thinking on it. It certainly needs to be captured somehow, somewhere. So
Well, and we've been told all along, even today, Billy said, we're not losing them. We have everything. We're keeping everything. So if we have to go back, we can see where it came from. And that's fine, but let's have a report of the process that we went through and why we decided to put this in and not put that one in.
And I think I agree. I think some of this, I'm praying will become clearer after we go through the prioritization. I mean, it could be, I'm going to cross my fingers, being an optimist is a part of being a farmer, that this could be resolved through the prioritization process, right? It might be that we come to a place where we find that this is a non-issue. I doubt that, but.
And that's fine. If we do come to that decision, that's fine. We just need to have a record of it.
Yep.
So
noted.
Let's maybe then talk about process for the next week. So this is where things get like a lot of work. So the thought is the folks who've been working on the kind of the matrices to bring greater clarity about like what was struck, et cetera, that's something we need by like very early next week. I mean, Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day for some people don't celebrate it, but note that. So I don't know whether people are working or not. Tuesday, whether maybe people can get it done by then. And then the thing that we thought would go forward then is for each of the pathways, of which Billy and Abby, I can't remember how many there are, 6 or 7. We would need at least 3 people on each to go through the rankings as directed by the Vermont Climate Council in terms of those 4 criteria and ranking them. And that would be, we'd want a person who can strongly have a voice for equity on each of those, someone who can have a voice for agriculture, someone can have a voice for forestry. And in some, not all of them, we may need a voice for wetlands, so wildlands, those things too. So there's some that's not as relevant, some it is. So we may have to make sure that voice is covered. Some people may be able to cover multiple categories here, but that is generally the thought there. So what we'd like to do is go through each and figure out if we can have at least, with that kind of rubric, if that makes sense, figure out who is going to be a small group to try to work through the rankings of these actions and strategies under each of the tabs or each of our pathways. So any questions about the process for trying to do that in the next week, and then we can talk about who's going to do what. And I'll start taking notes. So who led mitigation in terms of the cleanup of the spreadsheet? Ryan, that was you, right?
Yeah, I think I'll claim that.
Okay. So I wonder if we have someone for forestry and natural lands, and then someone for equity who would potentially do mitigation. Charlie, okay.
I mean, I'm happy to look at the forestry things. I think if we, the problem I'm having is if we tease apart things by focal area versus pathway, we're going to be jumping between multiple pathways. So just to be clear on how we're going to do that.
And I think pathways are our framework as required by the council. So we're going to stick with that because I think we have to.
Yeah, which is fine. So I guess. Go ahead.
I was going to suggest that, Charlie, what Pat's suggesting is that you would bring that expertise on forests and or natural lands to the pathways you choose to, and then I think other people can do that too. But the idea being that in order to have a balanced review of each pathway, you want to have somebody who's looking at equity, who's looking at forest, natural lands, and looking at agriculture to think comprehensively across the actions that are being proposed under them.
Okay, I got you. Thanks.
And I was just going to put a finer point on it too, Pat, around the application of the Excel document. I saw Justin made a comment in the chat that he's happy to provide some support for that, but I wonder if there's a support staff person for each of the pathways too, if we are choosing to use Excel, who can help navigate the application of prioritization there.
I was thinking there'd be kind of a coordinator for each group, potentially the person who already worked on the spreadsheet, which is they would hold the spreadsheet, enter the data that the group agrees to, and then also convene the group to actually have the conversation. So there'd be kind of not a lead because everyone's equal, but kind of a coordinator for each to make sure. So a question about equity is really important. There's a voice for equity in each of these. That also means people can get spread thin. And I can't speak for who can best speak to those topics. But I think certainly Judy and Iris have been very, very good advocates for equity. Also expect them to be in all of these is too much. So we need to kind of figure that out as well. But I've got Ryan and Charlie for tab A mitigation, but we want to make sure there's someone really representing and thinking about equity in that one as well. Allie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was wondering if this is a stage to elevate the idea. I brought this up way back in December when we haven't even formed this, but the idea of joint mitigation adaptation strategies with the conversation on the value, how do we elevate resilience and adaptation in our, all the recommendations we're making. One way to show the really big power of those strategies is to kind of tie them together. A lot of the actions and strategies we've suggested would actually classify as joint mitigation adaptation. And so really, when you're looking at like a cost benefits analysis, that's sort of the sweet spot because you get a really great outcomes on both. So just throwing that out there, we haven't really talked about that. We have two different pathways to capture that. And I don't know if there's a way for us to consider that.
There are two, Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, there are two criteria, both impact and co-benefits. So in part, if impact is greater because you're doing both mitigation and essentially resilience or adaptation, then theoretically that gets a higher score or a highest score because it does many things. And I think also in co-benefits, it would potentially capture that as well. But Jane, you want to weigh in on Allie's question? Okay. All right. So
we've also tried to reformat the climate action plan to flow from mitigation into resilience and adaptation, recognizing that we are going to want to tie the work together succinctly in the climate action plan too, and the benefits to both.
So am I understanding correctly that three people for each pathway need to have completely prioritized everything in that pathway by Friday?
That's the unfortunate goal, correct?
Okay.
Real quickly, working group, and I know we're at the time, we thought about whether people could do this individually, and we realized that would just then we'd be treating it as a math exercise. People need to have a conversation. it just felt like as hard as this is going to be, this felt like a better way to do it than trying to have everyone individually do it and add the sums and not have a conversation. People won't know everything about everything, all those kinds of things. So, all right, so I'm going to keep going and we'll come back to figure out what we're missing. B is adaptation. And Lauren, that was you, right? And I know Lauren had to go, so she might not be on the phone, but it was Lauren. And if there's other folks who can represent in that one, I don't know whether Lauren's more natural and working lands. Alyssa kind of weighed in there. She can cover agriculture. And again, I want to think about equity for that one as well. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. Energy and materials was C. A little more refined down now, given our kind of redefinitions. And I think who was Billy? Who did C?
I was involved with that. Ryan played a role as well, so you know, I'm happy to participate in that. But others should feel free to weigh in if it's important to them.
Okay. All right. Viability and economics. I know Abby, you and Jake, I think worked on both those. So we may leave that there, plus whoever else wants to. F was land use, Billy. That was you, is that right?
Yeah, I'm happy to be participate in the prioritization, but would certainly welcome anyone else to join in that.
Okay, and then I think education was Lauren. Did she do that one? Is that right?
I believe so.
Okay, so John's willing to help in agriculture. So let's see here. John, I don't know if you want to join in John, if you want to look at maybe join in the land use one. I don't know if that's a good fit for you or not. Don't know.
We'll find out, Pat.
Fair enough. Judy, which of these, if any, look most like you want to dive into with folks? Yeah, we can hear you. You're good.
The only day I have free is Monday. I can help anybody and everybody on Monday.
Okay. So I think and Judy, are there any, with that limitation in mind about Monday, we've become, are there any, I mean, is any of these in particular you really want to sink your teeth into? I don't know whether, you know, I wonder about the first three in particular, but mitigation, adaptation, energy, and materials.
Sure. I mean, they all need to be considered. And if anybody has questions or comments, I'll be available the entire day on Monday.
Iris, I don't know how you feel about land use as one, but I wonder if you'd be one to kind of work on that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to join in that.
Okay. And I might have put you with Lauren education if you're willing and if you have time.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. I really want to be part of that conversation too.
Because I know Abby has been thinking a lot about equity for the viability and economies. Abby, I'm thinking maybe you can have a dual role there with Jake about really thinking about equity as you go through.
Yeah, and I maybe, I don't know if I should admit this or not or what, but Kaya and I have been talking offline about that as well to try to incorporate some of the specifics around some of the challenging issues that are happening external to this process. So I think it is being fairly considered there, but happy to have input, obviously.
David Mears, I don't see your name down for anything. So interest, time, willingness.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a slew of grant deadlines, so I'm happy to be a resource anywhere, but I have very limited time next week.
Okay. And is there any other working group member I missed who we haven't tried to sign up for something? Okay. So I think what I want to note for folks A through C, which is mitigation through energy, Judy's time frame is Monday, is the time that she has available. So I probably encourage the coordinator of each, which is Ryan for A, Lauren for B, and Billy for C, to maybe reach out to Judy and find a way to engage in that conversation around rankings, I think is going to be important. So I think we may have to leave that to individuals to reach out via email and sort out time and a way to do that.
I'm sorry. Isn't it my understanding that we're gonna just kind of individually work off of a sheet that has the rankings kind of added to it so we can work independently? Or did I misunderstand that?
I think the thought is each of you should, you as the lead for that section, need to make sure you have your tab for your spreadsheet. I think potentially we may, I guess this is just a logistical question, whether we pull everything off of the SharePoint and you create your own worksheet to work on so you don't futz with, any sharing confusion, and we'll have to when the tabs back together at the end. But I think the thought is that the small groups work together to do the rankings. But Abby.
Was it said that Marion could add in, how are we, oh my God, I'm sorry if I'm losing my train of thought. Are the rankings and the categories in each individual tab with then a comment column to talk about? How are we tracking that process as we go through it?
Jane or Marion, can you speak to just the logistics?
That's what we've done for the other subcommittees, is each pathway tab has the foundational criteria added with a drop down for high, medium, low, or high, moderate, low, depending on what the ranking is, and then a column next to it for you all to keep track of notes, because you'll want to kind of be able to keep a record of why you ranked something as high, medium, or low for each of the criteria. So Judson was messaging me as well. I think he and I could maybe work on doing that for the spreadsheet that you all have, and you all would download it and I think work in your separate tabs. And then someone would have to compile it back together. I have not been working as closely with your spreadsheet, so I'm not sure.
The challenge is you guys are cleaning up your spreadsheets today or soon, and then of course it has to go into the ranking mode. So I'm not sure how best to do that. Abby, I think Lauren was going to help get all your stuff, was going to get you stuff in the shared Excel document. You were going to work from that. Other folks, maybe for now, you need to work in the shared document on SharePoint just so it's all in one place. And then Marion knows what to pull from to create the additional tabs. Marion, what do you think?
Sorry, I wasn't quite following that. You want me to pull what, when?
Well, I'm thinking everyone has to work from the shared Excel spreadsheet on SharePoint, so we don't have 1,000 versions, because we're trying to clean up the spreadsheet as we start to rank practically at the same time. That's the problem here.
Yeah,
Is that how you all have been doing it out of the SharePoint site? Does that actually work for folks? Okay.
It has been with this, and for those of us who are severely challenged in the Excel realm, the less toggling between various Excel spreadsheets we have to do would be appreciated. I know that is only relevant to me, so I guess I'm speaking for me. Like if I could edit onto or have it all in the SharePoint, I know how to get to that and I know how to navigate that. So if the prioritization could be within that document, I think it would help, or maybe Judson can just help me straighten that out later. I'm sorry.
So why don't Judson and I, if you're willing, I'll email you and we can work on what to add into that spreadsheet so that it's in SharePoint. Folks can clean up the actions from the discussion today, and then you all can use that same document that you've been using that's in the same location. It's just adding a couple of columns. So even if you're deleting actions or combining them, it should all, once the columns are in there, it should be fine. If that makes sense.
Okay, so here, just to be really, and I know we're past time, is that the instructions from Vermont Climate Council are our guide, the definitions, the way to do this. Whether we like it or not, that's the process, so use it, which means a little bit of reading of that. It's cleaning up the spreadsheets, which are kind of spreadsheet leads are going to try and do, if even today would be ideal. You're going to then, Marion or Judson or both will add the columns for the, the areas where you're going to rank high, medium, low. And then you all need to kind of dive into that. And I think co-chairs need to have preferably that ranking done by Thursday noon, so we can share that with the full group, and we'll have to figure out how to handle the conversation on that Friday. Billy and Abby, does that sound like the painful but probably needed deadline?
Sure.
Can I ask a clarifying question just for the minutes? Is it safe to say that you're going to send out written instructions to the subcommittee on how to prioritize and where? And also, can you recap who's on each, who's working on each tab, or is that also going to go out in an email later and I can just note that?
I don't want to get that quickly now, but I think the instructions are actually from the Vermont Climate Council. They're quite explicit. Jane, do you want to, I don't know whether we need to put them in chat or what, but those are already developed.
Yeah, and they're on the on your website for today.
Okay.
So I wonder if maybe Sonia, if you're speaking to the actual application of using the spreadsheet that Marianne and Justin are going to work on. Once that's done, I imagine Marianne will graciously send it out to the subcommittee.
I was just trying to be helpful and capture like the plan, but if it's in a document, I can just link to that document. And I
thanks,
see
Sonia.
kind of in the chat that I might not be the only one who's confused about the plan.
So I think, why don't we send out some explicit instructions this afternoon about this? I think that probably will be helpful. So why don't we do that, including who's doing what and when? So why don't we do that? Co-chairs, I can draft something for you to look at before, and then you guys can send it out. And I'll put that in Word so you can edit it. And I'll try to get that to you ASAP.
Sounds good.
All right, I know we're way over time. So co-chairs, back to you, public comment, close.
Sure. Anyone like to share some comments right now? Okay, seeing none, I think we're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good week and enjoy the foliage.
Thanks all.